The sea had always known her name. Marina Kalin had grown up believing that. She had believed it the way a child believes in things that feel true before they are tested, with her whole chest, with no room left over for doubt. She had believed it when the elders of the Tide Council stripped her of her position, when her voice had been silenced by their decree. She had believed it even when the man she'd trusted with every secret she carried had looked at her across the ceremonial chamber and chosen ambition over her name. She had believed it all the way to the shore. And now, the sea was turning against her. The tide that night was the color of old bruises, deep violet where the moon fractured against the surface, almost black in the hollows between the waves. Marina did not arrive on the beach with any grace. The current made that decision for her, pushing her onto the sand the way the ocean pushes things it releases, heavy, unfeeling, leaving her with nowhere else to go. Her fingers dug into the wet grit before her mind had fully registered that she'd arrived. Grasping, anchoring. Here. You're here. Her throat burned as if she had swallowed something far too harsh. Every breath came late. The kind of breath that feels borrowed, like the air is considering whether you've earned it. She pressed her cheek against the cold sand and let herself breathe for a moment. Just that, just breathing, before she tried anything else. The cold was the worst of it. Not the kind of cold you feel on the skin, which is manageable, which passes. This was the interior cold, the kind that had worked itself past muscle and into bone, settling deep where it had no right to be, until it felt less like a temperature and more like a fact. Like something that had always been there and had only now decided to announce itself. She had been in the water for a very long time. Too long, her body informed her, in the flat and clinical way that bodies report damage when they've moved past the part where panic is useful. Her ancient, silver-scaled tail, the one she had worn since her first breath, had stopped moving somewhere in the last hours of open ocean. It happened, in extremity. The body chose its form of least resistance and held it. She was human-shaped now, fully. And human-shaped bodies, she had learned the hard way, were not built for 3 days in the winter sea. Get up. The voice was internal, the same one that had pushed her through the northern current when the cold front dropped without warning and turned the sea into something even she couldn't simply move through. The same stubborn, exhausting voice that had kept her lungs working through open water when every other part of her had been prepared to simply go quiet. She pressed her palms against the wet sand and pushed. What happened was almost nothing. Her arms shook. The message from her brain reached her muscles and dissolved somewhere in transit, like instructions sent to someone who has already put down their tools and gone home. She managed an inch, maybe 2. The weight of her own body felt unfamiliar, heavier than she remembered, strange at the edges, uncertain in ways that unsettled her more than the cold did. She stopped. All right. She lay back down and let the sand hold her, because there was nothing else available that would. The waves came in on a slow rhythm, touched the ends of her hair, and retreated. She watched the sky. She had seen these stars 1,000 times from below the surface, blurred through the lens of the water, fractured into something abstract and shifting, the way sound changes when it has to travel down instead of across. From below, the stars had always looked like they belonged to the same world she did, like they were underwater too. From here, flat on her back in the sand with salt drying on her lips and the cold settling in for the night, they looked very close. Very clear, very indifferent. She thought, in the drifting, unfocused way of a mind running on reduced power, about Leora, her younger sister, the one who had stood in the ceremonial chamber when the decree was read aloud. Marina Kalin, stripped of the voice, declared a disruption to the order of the deep, and had not met her eyes, had looked at the floor, had kept her face very still in the specific way of a person who has learned, through long and difficult practice, to be still in the presence of things that hurt. Marina hadn't blamed her then. She still didn't. Leora had done what she needed to do to survive. They all had. The problem was that Marina's version of surviving had brought her here, to this particular stretch of cold beach, at this particular hour, with this particular inability to stand. She heard them before she could see anything. Boots on wet sand, heavy, purposeful, the kind of footsteps that belong to people who are used to their presence being registered before they arrive. More than one set. She counted 4 on instinct, maybe 5, moving with the controlled deceleration of people who have been running and have only just eased into a jog. "Tracks cut south," said a low voice. Male. The kind of voice that gives instructions and doesn't wait to confirm they've been received, because it has never had reason to doubt that they have been. "Trail ends at the waterline, Your Majesty." Your Majesty. The phrase landed somewhere at the back of her mind without properly connecting. She was too cold for full translation. Then the footsteps stopped. The quality of the silence changed. She had spent her life reading silences, in the deep water, in the court, in rooms where decisions were being made about her while she stood in them. This silence had the particular texture of people encountering something they did not expect. Recalibrating. "What in the—" someone began. "Hold." One word. Low and clean, like a blade laid flat on a table. The person speaking stopped as if a hand had closed around the sentence and gently removed it from the air. A single set of footsteps now, different from the others. Slower, more deliberate. The pace of someone who has not yet decided what they're walking toward and is choosing their footing accordingly. Marina turned her head. She found his boots first, black leather, salt-worn at the toe, functional in a way that had long outlasted any original decoration. Her gaze traveled upward with enormous effort. Dark trousers, a long traveling coat that the wind pressed against his frame, broad shoulders, and then a face that the moonlight carved without flattery. Sharp planes, a jaw that suggested someone who had made a great number of difficult decisions and had not softened around any of them. Dark eyes moving fast and methodical across every part of her at once, counting the things that were wrong. He crouched down. Not slowly, not hesitantly, with the quick, efficient movement of someone who has dealt with injured people before and knows that the most important thing is to get level with them. His knees came down into the wet sand without any apparent concern for the coat. He looked at her the way she'd seen very few people look at anything, directly, completely, as if the information she was providing deserved his full attention, and he had decided to give it. "She's alive," he said, to the men behind him. "Barely." The second voice was lighter, slightly crooked at the edges, carrying the easy energy of someone who has decided that the world is interesting, and his job is to locate the interesting angle in whatever moment presents itself. "Also Kaylin, just noting that she appears to be wearing something the moonlight is going to have strong opinions about. The fabric looks, well, like scales." The man crouching in front of her did not react to his name. Did not react to the observation either, not outwardly. His eyes stayed on Marina. Kaylin. The name settled in the back of her mind and stayed there. "Can you hear me?" he asked. Marina opened her mouth. What came out was not words exactly, more like the shape of an attempt, thin at the edges and broken in the middle, with nothing solid to build on. "Don't." His voice dropped, just slightly. It was not softness. She could tell already that softness was not the right word for anything about him. It was something else. A deliberate lowering of the volume, the way you lower a flame that's burning too high for the room. "Don't force it. Just blink if you understand me." She blinked. Something moved in his expression. A small thing, there and then contained. "Can you move? On your own?" She blinked twice, the closest she could get to no. He looked at her for one more second, that thorough, unhurried look. And then she felt the decision happen in him. Not announced, not explained, just the shift from assessing to moving, from calculation to action, the way water decides it's done with the bank it has been pressing against. He stood and turned to the men behind him. "We get her off the beach. She's been in the water long enough for it to matter." He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. "Coastal shelter is the fastest route," someone said. Then that. He looked back at her. And then he did something she had not expected. He asked, "I'm going to carry you," he said. Simply. Directly. His dark eyes on hers, steady in the dark. "Is that all right?" Marina held his gaze for a moment. The alpha king of wherever this was, crouching in the wet sand at the edge of the tide with his coat hem getting ruined, asking a half-drowned woman on a cold beach for her permission. She blinked once. He moved with efficiency, but not roughness. His arms came under her with the kind of care that doesn't make a show of itself, doesn't announce its own gentleness. Just as gentle because the situation calls for it, and he had apparently decided to meet what the situation called for. He stood, and she was against his chest, and then his coat was around her. Not dramatically, not folded close with ceremony, just present, the way a wall offers shelter, structurally rather than tenderly. And it was warm. Shockingly, almost violently warm against everything that had been cold in her for so long. Marina closed her eyes. She did not intend to. It was simply what happened when the cold began to lose its argument against the warmth. Her body, which had been fighting for so long, made a unilateral decision to stop fighting this particular thing. His heartbeat was against her ear, even and certain, the rhythm of someone who is not going to fall apart, whatever it costs to hold that line. She let herself exist inside that rhythm for a moment. Just a moment. Behind them, the sea pulled back from the shore. That slow, ancient withdrawal, the tide releasing the land and returning to itself. And beneath it, far below where any human ear could reach, Marina felt the deep places pulse. The low, wide heartbeat of the water she had come from. The water that still knew her name, even now, even here, even after everything the council had taken. It had not forgotten her. She held on to that thought as the dark came up to meet her. The warm dark this time, the kind that comes with rest rather than drowning. And let herself be carried toward the lights she could not yet see. She only knew the warmth, and the heartbeat, steady and certain in the dark. And that, for now, was enough. She woke in stages. First the warmth, the blanket first, rough wool against her skin, the kind that scratches just enough to let you know it's real. Then the smell, wood smoke, pine resin, something faintly mineral that rose from the stone walls themselves. Then the fire, crackling in the hearth somewhere close, its sound so ordinary and so alive that her chest tightened unexpectedly in response. She had not expected to be anywhere warm at all. Marina lay still and let the waking happen around her before she announced herself in it. Old habit. The kind of habit that gets built in places where arriving noticed meant arriving vulnerable. She had learned it young in the Tide Court, refined it across years of chambers and councils and conversations that had a surface meaning and a true meaning and several careful layers in between, and she had never been able to unlearn it, probably would not have wanted to, even now. The ceiling above her was stone. Old stone, shaped by patient hands across generations, fitted together with care that had long since calcified into permanence. The firelight moved across it in slow, warm pulses. Voices, low and close, carrying the careful register of people who were making a deliberate effort not to wake someone. Breathing evenly. Fever didn't develop. Measured, quiet authority. Good. There it was, the voice she had filed away on the beach. The one that had said, "Is that all right?" with that flat, unperformed directness. When she wakes, water first. Broth if Cato managed to find any. If Cato managed... The lighter voice, the crooked-edged one, now radiating mild offense from the far wall. "I want it acknowledged, for the historical record, that my supply acquisition success rate is 100%. Lifetime. No exceptions. A brief pause. You traded your spare riding gloves for a pot of salt pork last month, Kaylin said, in the middle of a patrol. Those gloves were redundant. The salt pork was essential. Context matters, sire. You ate half of it before we made camp. I was conducting a quality assessment. A beat, perfectly timed. The rest was very good. You're welcome. Marina would have smiled if her face had been more cooperative about it. She opened her eyes. The room was small. The coastal shelter built entirely for function. No gestures toward comfort beyond what the fire provided. Stone walls, one narrow window through which the last of the night had given way to the flat gray of very early morning. 3 of them. She catalogued quickly, the way she always catalogued. Kaylin first, in the chair nearest the fire, the long traveling coat gone now, down to a plain dark shirt with the sleeves pushed to the elbows, sitting in the posture of someone who had been awake a long time and was refusing to discuss it. His head turned the moment her eyes opened. Not startled, just present. Like part of him had been waiting for exactly that. Cato next, standing near the supply shelf, because apparently sitting was not his default state. He was younger than she'd registered on the beach, with the kind of face that had clearly made a foundational decision very early in life to lead with warmth rather than authority. Bright eyes. The loose, easy posture of someone who had never found a room he couldn't make himself at home in. When he noticed her watching him, he lifted a hand in a small wave. Morning, he said. Technically, the sun is debating whether to commit. And the third, Ren, she would learn later, near the door, solid and watchful, his stillness so complete he might have been carved from the same stone as the walls. He acknowledged her consciousness with a single nod, then returned his eyes to his post with the professional serenity of a man who considers unnecessary speech a form of waste. Marina looked at the ceiling, then the fire, then, carefully, at her own hands. Still her hands, human-shaped, present. None of the faint translucence that came at the edges of true exhaustion when the boundary between forms grew thin and uncertain. Her fingers bent when she asked them to. The cold ache remained deep in her bones, but retreating. Slowly, honestly, retreating. She sat up. Easy, Kaylin said. He had not moved from the chair, but his attention sharpened. I'm all right. Her voice came out scraped thin by salt and cold, and the hours in between. She stopped, swallowed, tried again. I'm all right. You keep saying that, Cato offered helpfully. And yet you were a beach discovery 2 hours ago, so I'm going to suggest we hold the final verdict until we have more data. Cato. Kaylin's voice had not changed in volume. Something in the quality of it had. Just an edge. Just enough. The verbal equivalent of a hand placed flat on a table. Cato subsided with the practiced ease of someone who had heard that exact tone many times and had developed a reliable internal system for knowing when it meant stop and when it meant merely pause. This, his posture communicated cheerfully, was a pause. Marina looked at Kaylin. He was looking at her with the same direct attention he'd had on the beach. No performance in it, no social cushioning, just the clear, present focus of a person who had decided that what was in front of him deserved his full attention and had given it. Do you know how long you were in the water? He asked. 3 days, approximately. She paused. The current took longer than I expected. 3 days. He said it without inflection, just receiving it, filing it. Where were you coming from? North, she said. Far north. That's a direction. Yes, she agreed. For now, it's what I can offer. Something moved in his expression. Not frustration, not impatience. Closer to the look of a man who has encountered a locked door and is deciding calmly whether this one warrants the effort of finding a key, or whether it will open from the inside if he simply waits long enough. He decided to wait. She could see that too. He stood without ceremony and crossed to the shelf, poured water from a clay pitcher into a cup, and brought it to her. Held it out. Waited. Marina took it. The rim was cool against her cracked lips. The water was plain, slightly mineral. Extraordinary. She drank. Across the room, Cato watched this transaction with the expression of a man holding back a thought he had been specifically not asked to voice, managing the effort with only moderate success. "You have something to say," Marina said. "I have several things to say," Cato confirmed. "I'm practicing restraint. It's a new skill. The early stages are turbulent." He pushed off the wall and settled into the second chair with the confident ease of someone claiming territory that was always going to be his. "My name is Cato, second in command, chief of what I privately call our Emotional Intelligence Division, and the person who found something this morning that we should probably discuss before we discuss anything else." Marina went still, not outwardly. Outwardly, she kept the cup at her lips, and her breathing even, and her expression at the measured neutral she had spent years building into something reliable. But inwardly, the deep place inwardly, the part of her that had always been more attuned to the current beneath the surface than to the surface itself, something locked. She looked at Cato. His bright eyes had gone careful. Not alarmed. Cato, she was beginning to understand, did not do alarmed as a default, but serious in the way that certain people become serious when the situation has earned it. He glanced briefly at Kaelin, who had returned to his chair and was watching Marina with that same still, patient attention, and then back to her. "When I was checking the supply shelf this morning," he said more quietly now, "I found something that must have slipped underneath it during the night. I think it fell from you." He reached to the shelf without looking away from her face. His hand came back with something small resting carefully in his open palm. "I didn't move it far. I didn't want to. I wasn't sure what." He stopped himself. Simplified. "Here." The room changed. Marina felt it before she looked at it properly. That particular shift in the quality of the air that happens when something is introduced into a space that does not belong to the ordinary world. The scale lay in Cato's palm, curved like a fragment of something far larger, silver blue in the thin morning light. It caught the fire and the gray window light simultaneously, and did something with both of them that neither fire nor gray morning light should technically be capable of producing. The iridescence moved across its surface the way deep water moves, alive, layered, carrying light down into itself and returning it changed. There was no dye in the world that made that color. There was no craftsman alive who had successfully replicated that sheen. Marina set the cup down carefully. She looked at the scale in Cato's palm, and then she looked at Kaelin. He was already looking at her, had been, she understood, since the moment Cato reached for the shelf. He had been watching her face, reading it the way she had read his earlier, looking beneath the surface of it, searching for the current that ran underneath the words. The fire crackled. Outside, the sea was audible. It was always audible on this coast, the kind of sound that fills silences whether or not you've invited it. "Marina," Kaelin said. Her name. Use the way you use a name when you need to make certain the person wearing it is fully present for what comes next. "Yes," she said quietly. "What are you?" The question landed clean. No alarm in it. No sharpened edge of threat. No performance of power. Just the direct, unembellished need for truth that she had already come to understand was simply how this man asked things. How he asked everything, probably. Without softening. Without pretending the question was smaller than it was. Marina looked at the scale for a moment. That small silver-blue piece of what she was, lying in an ordinary man's ordinary hand inside a stone room very far from the sea, looking entirely, impossibly like itself. She had no reason left to hide. Not here. Not now. Not from these people, in this room, with the warmth still working its way back into her bones. "I am the last of the merfolk," she said, "the last mermaid. The others are gone, bound to the deep places in ways that do not permit return, or simply gone. I was the voice of the Tide Court until 3 weeks ago, when the council declared me a disruption to the Order of the Deep and stripped that title from me." She paused. "Let the words settle. I mean no harm to your territory or your people. I am trying to find a way forward from a place that no longer exists." The silence that followed was complete. The fire filled it anyway, indifferent to revelations, conducting its own business with the wood. Then Cato said, very carefully, "I knew the scale was significant." He turned to Kaelin with an expression that was attempting to contain approximately 4 separate reactions simultaneously. "So when I said this morning that I was indispensable, Cato, I am simply noting that this confirms my thesis." He looked back at Marina, and whatever complicated mixture had been moving across his face settled finally into something simple and genuine. "You're safe here. I want to say that clearly, before the more complicated conversation happens. Whatever you are, you're safe." Marina looked at him. She had spent years in a court where every kindness had a price attached beneath its surface, where safe meant safe until I need something else from you. She had learned to turn every offered word over in her hands and check the underside before accepting it. But Cato's face held no second layer, no hidden architecture. It was simply open. She looked at Kaelin, and there it was. It was not dramatic. It did not announce itself. But Marina had spent her entire life reading what moved beneath still surfaces, and what moved beneath Kaelin's face in that moment was unmistakable to her, even if it would have been invisible to anyone else in the room. He had felt something. When she said merfolk, when she said last. Something had shifted in him. Fast, involuntary, the way a compass needle shifts when it comes into range of what it's built to find. His jaw had tightened by a fraction. His eyes had gone a shade darker. And then, just as quickly, a wall had come up behind them. Deliberate, controlled. The expression of a man who has felt something he did not ask to feel and has decided in the span of a single breath that he will not be feeling it. Marina recognized that wall. She had seen it built before, in the Tide Court, in the faces of counselors who had received information that complicated their existing plans. The wall that goes up when something new arrives, and the person building it decides the new thing is a problem rather than a gift. She held his gaze. She waited. "The last," he said. His voice was even, carefully even. "Yes." "And the Tide Court exiled you?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. His dark eyes moved to the scale in Cato's palm, and then back to her face, and then, briefly, barely noticeably, away, to the window, to the gray light over the water. "I need to speak with my second," he said. It was not unkind. It was not cruel. It was simply a door, closing, a withdrawal into something procedural, something that had the shape of this situation requires assessment, and the feeling, Marina understood with a clarity that sat cold in the center of her chest, of you are a complication I have not yet decided how to categorize. Cato looked at Kaelin. Something passed between them. Fast, readable to Marina only because she had spent years learning to read things people thought were invisible. Cato did not agree, but he stood. "I'll check on the horses," he said, with the careful neutral of someone who is choosing, deliberately, not to say what he is actually thinking. He paused at the door, looked back at Marina, held her gaze for one moment with an expression that said, plainly, "This is not my decision, but I want you to know it is not mine." Then he was gone. Ren followed without being asked, the door pulling shut behind them both with the quiet, final sound of stone finding stone. The room was smaller with just the two of them in it. Marina did not move. She kept her hands around the empty cup, the clay still faintly warm, and her spine straight, and her face at the neutral she had built across years of practice. She did not let the cold that was moving back into her chest show anywhere on the surface. Kalen stood at the window. His back was to her. His shoulders carried the specific tension of a man who is thinking hard about something he does not want to be thinking about. And the line of his back had lost, somewhere in the last 2 minutes, the controlled authority it had held since she first saw him on the beach. The sea moved outside, indifferent and enormous. "What you are," he said finally. To the window, to the gray light beyond it. The merfolk. A pause, and the pause had weight in it. There are laws in this territory, old laws. Laws that were written before my father's time, before his father's time. Laws about what is permitted within Ravencliff's borders and what is not. He stopped. Laws about things like me, Marina said. Her voice came out steady. She was grateful for that. He turned then, looked at her across the small stone room. His face was not cruel. That was the worst part of it, she would think later. The part that would stay with her longest. It was not cruel. It was the face of a man doing what he believed was correct, doing it with the flat, exhausted gravity of someone who has learned that being a king means making the decisions no one else will make, regardless of the cost. "I cannot offer you sanctuary here," he said. "Not without understanding what you are, what you carry, what the Tide Court's declaration means for the people of this territory." A breath. "I saved your life because you were dying on my shore and there was no other choice I could have made and lived with. But that debt is settled now. You are warm. You are alive. You are free to go," Marina said. The words were quiet, clean. She did not let them shake. Something crossed his face, fast, quickly controlled. Whether it was doubt or regret or simply the recognition of what the words sounded like, she couldn't tell. Didn't let herself look hard enough to find out. "I will give you provisions," he said. "And a direction. There is a neutral settlement 3 leagues east on the inland road. They do not operate under Ravencliff's old laws. You would be—" "Thank you," Marina said. She set the cup down. She stood. Her legs held, which she was grateful for, because it would have been unbearable to fall in this moment. She smoothed her hands down the scale fabric of her dress. That impossible, iridescent fabric that had announced her before she'd had a chance to decide what to say. And she looked at Kalen Voss, Alpha King of Ravencliff, who had asked her permission before carrying her and then sent her away before he knew her name. She memorized his face. Not because she wanted to. Because that was what she did with things she needed to understand later, when she had the distance and the quiet to do the understanding properly. "The sea does not forget this shore," she said. Not a threat. Just truth. The way the deep places worked, the way water worked, the way things that were felt by the ocean stayed felt. She didn't wait for a response. She walked to the door, and the cold outside was nothing. Nothing compared to what she was already carrying. And she did not look back. Behind her, she heard the fire. She heard the sea. She heard very faintly the sound of a man who did not call after her. And somewhere far below the floor of the world, in the deep places where the tide still knew her name, something noted what had happened on this shore. Something ancient and patient and utterly beyond human control. Began to wait. The inland road was exactly where he said it would be. Marina found it without difficulty. 3 leagues east, just as Kalen had said, the path rising away from the coast through low, wind-shaped scrubland, before flattening into something that had been walked enough times to remember the shape of feet. She followed it with her eyes on the horizon, and her jaw set, and the provisions they'd pressed into her hands. A cloth bundle, hardtack and dried meat, and a small skin of water, tucked under one arm like the afterthought it was. The morning had committed to itself by now. The sun was up, pale and thin and winter-honest, throwing shadows that were long and blue across the frost-stiffened ground. Her breath came in small clouds. Her feet were cold. She had no proper shoes for land travel, only the thin-soled wrappings that served in the water and served poorly everywhere else. But they held the road, and the road held her, and that was enough. She had been through worse. She repeated that to herself with the deliberate, rhythmic quality of a thing she was using to keep moving. I have been through worse. She said it the way you recite something true when the truth is the only tool you have left. The Tide Court had stripped her title in front of the full council, all 17 members arranged in their ceremonial positions in the chamber beneath the deep shelf, their faces arranged in the specific expression of people who have already decided and are performing the deciding for the record. She had stood in the center of that chamber with the cold water pressing in from all directions. Cold in a way that merfolk feel differently than humans do. Not just temperature, but intention. The sense of the deep places deciding what they think of you. And she had kept her chin up, and her hands still, and her voice, when she was permitted to speak, level. She had survived that. She could survive a stone room and a cup of water and a king who had looked at her like she was a variable he hadn't accounted for, and decided, reasonably, to remove her from his equation. It was reasonable, she told herself. Old laws. Territory. He doesn't know you. He doesn't know what the exile means or doesn't mean. It was reasonable. The cold in her chest did not find this argument convincing. She walked. She heard him before she saw him. Which was, she was coming to understand, a recurring feature of Cato's presence in any given situation. He arrived with sound, with movement, with the particular energy of someone who had made peace with the fact that subtlety was not among his primary gifts and had decided to lean into the alternative. The horse came up the road behind her at a canter, not rushing, not theatrical, just covering ground with the efficient purpose of an animal being asked to go somewhere specific. Marina stepped to the side of the path without turning around. She heard the hoofbeats slow. Stop. The soft sound of someone dismounting. Footsteps, coming up beside her. Cato fell into step at her left shoulder, with the conversational ease of someone picking up a discussion that had been briefly interrupted, rather than someone who had just ridden hard to catch a woman his king had sent away. The neutral settlement, he said, as if they were mid-conversation already, has a decent tavern. The ale is reportedly unremarkable, but the bread is very good. I have this on reliable authority. Marina kept walking. You followed me. I came to ensure you reach the road safely. The coast path has loose rock in the eastern section, and the frost makes it... He paused. All right, yes, I followed you. She glanced at him sideways. He was looking ahead, his hands loose at his sides, his expression carrying the particular quality of a person who has something to say and is deciding how honest to be about it. He had, she noticed, brought a second horse. It trailed behind his at a loose lead, saddled, steady-tempered, its breath making small clouds in the cold air. He sent you, Marina said. He did not send me, Cato said. In fact, if we are being accurate about the sequence of events, he told me to stay, and I left anyway, which means I am technically operating outside my official capacity right now, which is a position I find liberating and also mildly terrifying in equal measure. He paused. The horse is for you, by the way. The road is 3 leagues and your footwear is... He glanced down briefly at her thin-soled wrappings. Courageous. Marina stopped walking. Cato stopped too. They stood in the middle of the frost-pale road with the scrubland stretching away on both sides and the coast behind them, and the thin winter sun doing its best overhead. And Marina looked at him with the direct, careful assessment of someone who has learned not to accept things at face value, especially when they come wrapped in warmth. Why? She said. Simply, without decoration. Cato met her eyes. The brightness in his was still there, but steadier now, less performance, more something genuine underneath it. He turned the question over for a moment in the honest way of a person who respects the person asking enough to give the real answer. Because, he said, in 15 years of serving Kalen Voss, I have watched him make difficult decisions with complete certainty approximately 900 times. And I have watched him make a difficult decision and then stand at a window for 4 minutes not moving, exactly once. He paused. This morning was the second time. The cold in Marina's chest shifted, not gone, but different. Changed in temperature, in texture, like ice that has been touched by something warm and is in the very early stages of deciding what to do about it. She looked at the horse, at the road ahead, at Cato, who was watching her with the patient, uncomplicated kindness of someone who has no agenda except the one he'd already stated. She took the lead rope. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the kind of silence that exists between people who have no particular performance to maintain and have tacitly agreed not to fill the space with noise just because it's available. The land changed as they moved inland. The scrubland gave way to something wider, rolling moorland, gray-green and enormous under the winter sky, with the occasional dark shape of stone outcroppings rising from the earth like the backs of creatures too large to fully surface. The frost was heavier here, away from the sea's modifying warmth, and it coated the grass in a fine silver that caught the light and held it in a way that reminded Marina, uncomfortably, of scales. She looked away. "Can I ask you something?" Cato said after a while. "You'll ask it regardless," Marina said. "Fair point. I've been told my curiosity has a momentum issue." He settled more comfortably in the saddle. "The Tide Court. You were their voice. That means you spoke on their behalf? In negotiations, treaties, that kind of thing?" "Among other things." She kept her eyes on the road. "The voice was the interface between the court and the surface world. The one who could navigate both, who understood the deep places and could translate them into terms that the surface world found legible." A pause. "Most merfolk can't spend extended time above water. I could. That made me useful." She felt the word settle flat and hard in her mouth. Useful. Until I wasn't. What changed? Marina was quiet for a moment. The horse's hooves made a steady rhythm on the frost-hardened road. 4 beats, 4 beats, 4 beats. Like a pulse, like something patient and ongoing. "There is a law in the deep places," she said finally. "An old one. Older than the court. Older than the council. Older than the names they gave to things to make themselves feel like they owned them." She paused. "The merfolk call it the call of tides. It is a binding between the last living mermaid and the health of the ocean itself. If the last of us is lost before the binding is honored, the deep places lose their anchor. The tides lose their rhythm." Another pause. "The sea begins to take back what the sea was always going to take back. Eventually." Cato rode in silence for a moment, processing. "And you are the last," he said. "Yes. So the call of tides falls to me." She looked at the horizon, at the flat pewter line where the winter sky met the land. "The council decided that the binding made me a danger, that if I was present, above water, accessible, findable, it might be invoked by forces outside their control, that it might pull resources from the deep places into the surface world before the court was prepared." Her jaw tightened slightly. "They said it was a matter of protocol, of timing. They said it was for the good of everyone." "They exiled you," Cato said, "to keep the sea's most important safeguard out of anyone else's reach." "They exiled me," Marina said, "because the man who trained me to be their voice decided it was better to control the call than to honor it. and decided that controlling it meant removing me from every situation in which I might choose to invoke it without the council's permission. She felt the bitterness move through her. Clean, well-worn. The kind she'd already metabolized into something that no longer burned, but still had weight. His name was Soren. I had trusted him for 7 years. The silence that followed was the kind that forms around something true, that has been said aloud for perhaps the first time to someone who is actually listening. Cato didn't offer comfort. He didn't rush to fill the space with reassurances or recalibrations. He simply received it. Let it exist between them on the frost-pale road. "I'm sorry," he said after a moment. Just that. Nothing added. Nothing that would diminish it by making it larger. Marina looked at him sideways. He was watching the road ahead, his profile honest and unguarded. She thought about what he'd said earlier. He stood at a window for 4 minutes. Exactly once. And felt the thing in her chest shift again. He was afraid, she said. Not quite to Cato. Half to herself, half to the winter air. The king. Not of me specifically. Of what I am. Kaelin, Cato said carefully, has had a complicated relationship with things he doesn't understand. He's working on it. He glanced at her. That's not an excuse. I want to be clear that I'm not excusing it. I'm just contextualizing. You're loyal to him. Deeply, inconveniently, and apparently even when he makes decisions I disagree with. He tilted his head slightly, which is the truest test of loyalty, I think. It's easy to support someone when they're right. Marina turned that over in her mind. The road curved gently north, and around the curve the first shapes of the settlement appeared on the low rise ahead, stone buildings, smoke rising from chimneys, the distant and ordinary sight of a place where people simply lived their lives without any particular awareness of the vast, ancient machinery grinding away beneath the surface of the world. The call of tides, Cato said, after a moment. Is there a timeline, if it isn't honored? Marina felt the question land in the specific way that real questions land, with weight, with consequence, with the particular gravity of something that matters beyond the conversation it's been asked in. The deep places are patient, she said. The sea does not move like people move. It does not panic. She watched the settlement growing closer on the rise. But there are signs. The tide patterns shift. Irregular, then erratic. The storms come inland further than they should. The things that have always lived below the tide line begin to surface. A pause. And the coastal lands begin to feel it first. Cato went very still beside her. Marina felt him go still. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the road, on the settlement, on the thin winter smoke rising from the chimneys of ordinary people living their ordinary lives. How long ago, Cato said, with the specific, careful voice of someone who has just understood something they wish they hadn't. Did the eastern tide pools start running dry? Marina turned to look at him. His bright eyes were not bright in the same way anymore. They were doing something different. The fast, uncomfortable work of connecting things that had previously seemed unconnected. His jaw had tightened. His hands had gone still on the reins. You know about the tide pools, she said. We've been monitoring them for 8 months, he said. Kaelin had the Eastern Scouts document every cycle. The fishing is failing. The currents are wrong. 3 coastal villages in the southern reaches had flooding last winter that the tide patterns don't explain. He looked at her. We thought it was weather, a cycle, something that would correct itself. Marina held his gaze. It won't, she said quietly. Not on its own. The horses walked on. The settlement sat on the rise ahead, smoke and stone, and the small, unaware lives of people who did not know that the sea was beginning, very slowly, very patiently, to remember that it had once covered all of this. Cato was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that a person with a quick mind goes into when the quick mind is working very hard on something it has just been handed. "Marina," he said finally. "Yes, I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand that I am asking it on my own authority and not on anyone else's." He paused. "If you went to the settlement, if you stayed there, lived there, built something there, would that stop it? The tide patterns, the flooding, the failing currents." He looked at her steadily. "Or does the call of tides need to be honored for any of that to change?" Marina looked at the road, at the frost on the ground, silver and cold and beautiful in the winter light. She thought about the answer she could give him, the one that was easier, the one that left her with the settlement and the decent bread and the unremarkable ale, and a life assembled from pieces that were not quite any of the pieces she had lost. She thought about the coastal villages, about the tide pools, about the 8 months of documentation sitting in some room in Ravencliff Keep, patient and damning and misread. She thought about a man standing at a window. "No," she said, "the call needs to be honored." She felt the words leave her and understood, as they did, that they were changing the shape of the road ahead, that they were, in fact, changing the shape of everything ahead in ways she could not yet map. And to be honored, it requires the last of the merfolk. A pause. And a willing partner from the surface world. Someone with the authority to speak for the land the way the last mermaid speaks for the sea. She held Cato's gaze. It cannot be anyone. It has to be someone the land recognizes. The silence that followed had the specific, enormous quality of a silence that knows it is about to end. Cato looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the road behind them, back toward the coast, toward the stone shelter, toward the man they had both left standing at a window that morning. He turned his horse around. "Marina," he said. She looked at him. "I think," he said, with the expression of a man who has arrived at a conclusion he finds equal parts obvious and catastrophic, "that we need to go back." Marina sat on her steady, borrowed horse on the frost-pale road, with the settlement rising on the hill ahead of her, and the coast somewhere behind her, and the call of tides settling into the air between them like a name that had always been waiting for the right moment to be spoken aloud. She looked at the horizon, at the thin winter sky, at the pewter line where the sea, invisible from here, went on without her. "The sea will remember this shore," she had told him. She had not known, when she said it, how soon the remembering would begin. She turned her horse around. Kaelin was still at the window when they rode back into the shelter yard. Marina saw him from the road, a dark shape behind the narrow glass, motionless, his back to the outside world in the specific way of a man who has told himself he is thinking about something practical, and has not yet admitted that what he is actually doing is waiting. She noticed, and then she looked away, because noticing felt like an advantage she hadn't earned and didn't want. Cato dismounted with the brisk efficiency of someone who has made a decision and is now fully committed to the logistical consequences of it. "I'll go in first," he said. "You will not," Marina said. "I have a particular approach to difficult conversations." "You have a particular approach to all conversations," Marina said, "which is charming in most circumstances and counterproductive in this one." She swung down from the horse, her legs held, which she was grateful for, because arriving back after being sent away was already complicated enough without adding a graceless dismount to the list. She handed the lead rope to Cato and looked at the door. "I'll go alone." Cato looked at her, then at the door, then back at her. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think you're the most interesting thing that's happened to this territory in at least a decade." "That is worth very little right now," Marina said. "Fair," he agreed. "Go ahead. I'll be out here, possibly talking to the horses. They're better listeners than most people give them credit for. The door opened quietly. Kaylin turned from the window before she was fully inside. He had heard her, of course, with the particular acuity of someone whose senses extended further than ordinary hearing in ways that Marina was still learning to account for. He turned and saw her, and something moved through his expression in a fast, unguarded sequence. Surprise, then something that was not quite relief, and was trying very hard not to be. Then the careful, controlled authority reassembling itself over the surface of both. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has decided is a problem, and has just discovered is standing in his doorway again. "You came back," he said. "I did." Marina stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The fire was lower now. Nobody had fed it in the last hour. But the room was still warm enough to matter. She stood in the center of it and looked at him and said, without preamble, without softening, because she had learned in the Tide Court that the most merciful thing you can do with a difficult truth is deliver it cleanly. "Tell me about the Eastern tide pools." The shift in him was immediate. Not large. He was too controlled for large. But immediate. His jaw tightened by a fraction. His eyes sharpened. "How do you know about—" "Cato told me." She held his gaze. 8 months of documentation, failing fishing cycles, irregular tidal patterns, 3 villages with flooding the currents don't explain. She paused. How far inland did the last surge reach? Kaylin studied her. She could feel him doing it. That methodical, unhurried assessment. The one that catalogued everything and gave nothing away while it worked. "Far enough," he said. "I need a number." "Half a league past the tide line." His voice was flat. "In South Haven. The water came in during what the tide tables predicted would be a moderate cycle. It wasn't moderate." A pause. "We lost 2 grain stores and a fish drying operation that had been running for 40 years. The people were unharmed." He added that last part quickly, firmly, as if the people being unharmed was the thing he needed her to understand before anything else. She did understand it. She understood it, and she noted it, and she filed it away in the part of her mind that was assembling a picture of who this man actually was beneath the controlled surface. "It will happen again," she said. "Worse than last time. The pattern accelerates. It doesn't stabilize on its own. The deep places have been without an anchor for 3 weeks, which is not long by the sea's understanding of time, but it is long enough for the first effects to be visible." She watched him absorb this. "In another 3 months, the surges will reach a full league inland. In 6, the southern fishing territories will be functionally unusable. In a year—" "What stops it?" he said. She looked at him. "The call of tides," she said. "Do you know what that is?" "No." Of course not. The surface world had been carefully kept from knowing. That had been part of Soren's architecture. Keep the binding obscure. Keep the knowledge controlled. Keep the last mermaid isolated, and the call unspoken. Marina felt the old anger move through her. Not hot, not fresh, just present, the way a scar is present. She breathed through it. "Sit down," she said. "This is a long explanation." Kaylin looked at her. A flicker of something, not quite amusement, but the distant relative of it, moved across his face. "You're in my shelter." "Yes," Marina said. "And you need to hear this more than I need to observe the correct social hierarchy, so." She gestured at the chair. The flicker intensified slightly. He sat. Marina remained standing, not out of strategy, but because she thought better on her feet, always had. It was a merfolk thing. The deep places were not made for sitting still. And she told him. She told him about the call of tides, about the binding that existed between the last of the merfolk and the health of the ocean, that had been honored in every generation for as long as the deep places had memory, which was longer than any surface record. She told him how it worked, The anchor, the rhythm, the way the sea organized itself around a living point of connection, the way a current organizes around a fixed point in the water. She told him what happened when that point disappeared. She did not tell him everything. There were parts of the call she was still deciding about, the parts that involved the surface partner, the nature of the binding between them, the specific and ancient terms that the sea set for the honoring. Those parts she kept close for now. Not out of deception, but out of self-preservation. She had learned the cost of giving everything before she knew what someone would do with it. Kalen listened. He listened the way he seemed to do everything, with complete, focused attention, asking no questions until she finished, his dark eyes on her face the entire time. Not watching her the way someone watches a threat, watching her the way someone watches something they are trying very hard to understand accurately. When she finished, the fire had burned down another inch, and the light through the window had shifted from pale gold to the thinner, more honest light of mid-morning. The binding requires a surface partner, he said. Not a question. He had drawn it from the architecture of what she'd told him, the gap she'd left, the thing she hadn't quite named. Marina looked at him. Yes, she said. Someone the land recognizes. Yes. Which means someone with authority over the territory. He said it the way he said most things, flat, direct, already 3 steps ahead of the conversation in the direction it was going. Which means, in Ravencliff, me. Yes. The word sat between them in the warm, low-fire room. Kalen was still for a long moment. Outside, distantly, Marina could hear Cato talking to the horses with the genuine, invested energy of someone who had found his audience and was making the most of it. Something about patrol routes, apparently. One of the horses seemed to have opinions. You came back, Kalen said again. Quietly this time. Different quality. You were on the road. You were gone. He paused. You could have kept going. I could have, Marina agreed. Why didn't you? She looked at him. At the sharp, winter, honest planes of his face in the morning light. At the dark eyes that were, right now, not doing any of the controlled assessment she had already come to recognize as his default. They were just present. Open in a way that was small and probably involuntary, and entirely distinct from everything else she had seen from him. Because the flooding in South Haven is not the end of it, she said. And the people who live on this coast did not choose any of the decisions that are bringing the sea toward their doors. She paused. And because I have spent 3 weeks being carried along by things that were done to me, and I am very tired of moving in directions I didn't choose. She held his gaze. So I turned around, that's all. Kalen looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the fire. She watched him think. Watched the way he held the weight of it. The land, the sea, the binding, the thing she had not yet fully named, but that both of them could feel taking shape in the room around them. He held it the way he seemed to hold everything that fell under his responsibility, with the flat, unflinching grip of a man who does not put things down, simply because they're heavy. I rejected you this morning, he said. To the fire, not to her. On incomplete information. With the old laws as a reason when the truth was... He stopped. His jaw worked briefly. The truth was that I didn't know what to do with what you were, and I defaulted to the protocol of not knowing. He looked at her. That was wrong. Marina was quiet. She had not expected that. She had come back for the coastline and the tide pools and the people of South Haven. She had not come back expecting an accounting, had not prepared herself for one. And the absence of preparation meant that what she felt when the words landed was entirely unguarded. A small, involuntary opening in the thing she kept braced, like a window in a room that has been sealed for too long, admitting the briefest current of outside air. She closed it quickly. It's done, she said. We can move forward. Just like that? I don't have the luxury of staying in things that are over, Marina said. The sea taught me that. Tides don't argue with the shore they've already left. She met his eyes. It happened. You were wrong. You've said so. I've heard it. Now there is a coast to save and a binding to discuss, and approximately 4 months before the situation in South Haven stops being survivable. A pause. So yes, just like that. Something moved through his expression that was complicated and quiet, and that she chose deliberately not to examine too closely. The binding, he said. What does it require, specifically? His eyes were direct. He had heard the gap earlier, and he was going back for it now, because that was apparently what he did with gaps, noted them, and returned. You told me the sea needs an anchor. You told me it needs a surface partner. You didn't tell me what that means, what the sea actually requires. Marina looked at the fire. Outside, Cato had apparently moved from patrol routes to a detailed discussion of the relative merits of different types of saddle leather. One of the horses had changed its position, which Cato was interpreting, audibly, as agreement. She thought about the call, about the specific ancient terms, about what the sea asked of the surface partner and the last mermaid, and the space between them where the binding lived. She thought about how to explain something that had no surface world equivalent, that existed in a register that predated every word that had ever been used to describe human relationships, that was not a marriage, and not an alliance and not a contract, but contained elements of all three, and transcended all of them simultaneously. She thought about telling him everything right now. She thought about the cost of that. It requires, she said carefully, proximity, time. Enough of both for the sea to confirm that the partnership is genuine, not political, not practical, not a transaction. She paused. The ocean is very old and very patient and extraordinarily difficult to deceive. It will know the difference. Kaelin looked at her. Proximity and time. Yes. How much time? Enough. She held his gaze. The sea will tell us when it's enough. A silence. The fire snapped once, softly. You're asking me, he said slowly, to enter into something with the last mermaid, something the sea itself is judging for authenticity, without knowing the full terms. I'm asking you to consider it, Marina said. The full terms are complicated. And I have learned recently the cost of laying everything on the table before I know what the other person will do with it. She kept her voice even. So yes, I'm asking you to consider a step before I tell you where the full path leads. If that's not something you can do, I understand. There are other coastal territories, other people with the land's authority. No, Kaelin said. There aren't. Not for Ravencliff. He said it the way he said things that were simply facts. This territory is mine. If the sea is coming for it, I don't send someone else to answer. The words landed with a weight she hadn't prepared for. She looked at him, at this man who had sent her away this morning, and was now, with the same flat, unperformed certainty, saying I don't send someone else. At the specific, impossible consistency of him. She was beginning to understand, exactly the same person in every circumstance. The kindness on the beach and the rejection in the shelter, and this, all the same person, making the decisions he believed were right with the same gravity, the same directness, the same absolute absence of performance. It was, against every reasonable preference, deeply inconvenient. Then we need to talk about what comes next, she said. Yes, he said. But first, he stood, crossed to the fire and added 2 logs from the stack beside the hearth, unhurried, practical, tending the thing that needed tending before returning to the thing that required thought. When he turned back, there was something in his expression that was not quite the controlled authority and not quite the rare, small openness she'd glimpsed earlier. Something in between. First, I owe you a better version of this morning." Marina tilted her head slightly. "Cato found something in the provision pack," Kaylin said. "Actual bread. Apparently bartered from a farmstead they passed yesterday." The very faintest edge of something dry and warm entered his voice. "He's been saving it. He says it was for morale purposes." "His morale or ours?" Marina said. "When I asked him that," Kaylin said, "he said, and I quote, 'Morale is a collective resource, sire, and I am managing the supply for maximum community benefit.'" The dry edge sharpened, just slightly. He had eaten 1/3 of it before we left the farmstead road. Marina felt something shift in her chest. Not the complicated shifting of earlier. Not the braced and wary shifting of someone receiving difficult information, but something lighter. Something that moved upward rather than settling. She did not smile, but she was aware of not smiling in the specific way that means the smile is there regardless. "I'll take the bread," she said. "I thought you might," Kaylin said. He moved toward the provision shelf, and she watched him. This alpha king in a plain dark shirt, in a stone coastal shelter, fetching bread with the same gravity he applied to everything. And she thought, quietly, privately, somewhere deep below the part of her that was still braced, the sea chose well. Then immediately, don't. Then beneath that, too late. Outside, Cato appeared to have concluded his hoarse conversation, and was now whistling something cheerful and slightly off-key, entirely comfortable with the fact that no one had invited him back inside yet, and apparently in no particular hurry to be. The fire burned steadily. The sea moved outside against the base of the cliffs, and in the small warm room, a king and the last mermaid sat across from each other with bread between them and the weight of an ancient binding gathering itself quietly in the air, patient as water, unhurried as the tide, waiting for them to be ready. The journey to Ravencliff Keep took the rest of that day. They rode north along the coast road. Kaylin ahead, Marina beside him, Cato slightly behind them both in the position of a man who had decided, with great strategic wisdom, that the two people in front of him needed space, and that his job was to maintain the space without making it obvious that he was maintaining it. He was, Marina was coming to understand, considerably more perceptive than his cheerful surface suggested. The easiness was real, but underneath it, there was someone paying very careful attention. Ren rode at the rear, maintaining the steady silence that appeared to be his primary contribution to any situation. Marina had decided she respected him for it. The coast road was remarkable in the way that places are remarkable when they have been lived alongside for a long time. Not dramatic, not performing their beauty for visitors, just present. The cliffs on the left dropped away to the sea in long, pale falls of stone. The moorland on the right opened into distance. The wind had the specific quality of a wind that belongs somewhere, that has been crossing this particular ground for long enough to know every rise and hollow and stone. And Marina felt it against her face and thought, distantly, that she understood what that was like, belonging to a place, being shaped by it. She had not had that, not in the way the surface world had it. Rooted, specific, territorial in the way of things that stay. The merfolk moved with the currents, followed the deep patterns, belonged to the ocean the way birds belong to the air, completely, without a fixed address. She had always thought that was freedom. She was no longer entirely certain what it was. "You're quiet," Kaylin said. He had not looked at her. He was watching the road ahead with the habitual alertness of someone whose awareness of their surroundings had long since stopped being effort and become simply how they existed in space. "I'm thinking," Marina said. "What about?" She considered how honest to be. Decided on partial. "What it costs," she said, "to belong somewhere." A pause. The horse's hooves on the coast road, the wind, the distant sea. "That depends," Kaylin said, "on whether the somewhere wants you there." Marina looked at him. His profile was toward her. The sharp line of his jaw, the the dark hair the wind was doing things to that he was not acknowledging. The set of his shoulders that managed to be both easy and alert simultaneously in the specific way of people who have carried responsibility for a long time and have stopped noticing the weight. "In my experience," she said, "the somewhere usually decides that question before you arrive." "In mine," he said, "the question usually gets decided by what you do after you arrive." He looked at her then. Brief, direct. The look of someone making a point that is also, possibly, something more than a point. Marina looked back at the road. Behind them, Cato made a small, satisfied sound that he converted rapidly into a cough when Kaelin glanced back. "Something to add," Kaelin said. "Just a passing thought," Cato said pleasantly. "Gone now. You were saying?" "I wasn't saying anything." "No," Cato agreed. "You were doing the other thing, which is arguably more effective." He met Marina's eyes briefly, over Kaelin's shoulder, with an expression that said, "See? I told you without any words at all." Marina looked at the horizon, decided the horizon was the safest available option. Ravencliff Keep appeared as the light began its long winter retreat toward early evening. It rose from the headland above the sea, not the tall, decorative architecture of the interior kingdoms, all towers and statement stonework. This was different. Lower, broader, built into the rock of the headland itself, as if someone had looked at the cliff and decided to simply continue it upward. The walls were the same gray-white stone as the coast, weathered to the same texture by the same wind, and in the fading light it had the quality of something that had grown there rather than been built. Marina looked at it as they crested the last rise, and felt something she hadn't expected to feel. The keep was alive with the sea. She could feel it from here. The way the building sat on the headland. The way the stone had absorbed 40 years of salt air and ocean sound. The way the ground beneath it was saturated with the deep memory of water. The land here was not indifferent to the sea the way inland territories were. It was in conversation with it, always had been. The call stirred in her awareness. That deep internal sense she carried. The one that had always been more attuned to the ocean's conditions than to anything in the surface world. It stirred and then settled in a way she hadn't felt since before the exile. Like something recognizing something. She said nothing. She kept her face at its practice neutral and followed Kaelin through the keep's main gate, under the arch of old stone, into a courtyard where 2 stable hands appeared from the side building and took the horses with the brisk, familiar efficiency of people who knew their king's arrival by the sound of his horse on the road. Then she stepped into the courtyard fully, and the keep arranged itself around her. The main hall ahead, the south wing to the right, the storage and working buildings to the left, and she felt the ground beneath her feet the way she sometimes felt the sea floor when she walked the shallow places, present, specific, textured. The land recognizes him, she thought, and it knows I'm here. "Your rooms will be in the east wing," Kaelin said beside her. He had dismounted without ceremony, and was watching her with the direct attention she was learning was simply his version of courtesy. Not performative, not managed, just present. "It faces the sea." "Thank you," Marina said. "I thought..." He paused. Something brief crossed his face, quickly rearranged. The view seemed relevant. Behind them, Cato was handing his horse off to the stable hand with a cheerful commentary on the animal's preferences and general personality that the stable hand appeared to be receiving with polite bewilderment. "He does that with everyone," Wren said, appearing at Marina's left with the quiet materiality of a very large ghost. It was the first complete sentence she had heard from him. His voice was low and deliberate, each word selected carefully before deployment. "The horses find it soothing. The stable hands less so." "And you?" Marina said. Wren considered this for a moment with the gravity of a man for whom small questions deserved genuine thought. "I've learned to find it useful," he said. "He talks enough for everyone. Means the rest of us can be quiet." He moved away before she could respond. Marina looked at Cato, who had finished his horse consultation and was approaching with the energy of a man arriving somewhere he intended to enjoy. "Ren spoke to me," she said. Cato's eyebrows rose. "Voluntarily?" "Yes." "Full sentence?" "2." Cato looked genuinely impressed. "You've been here 4 minutes," he said. "That's faster than me, and I've known him 3 years." He shook his head with something that was equal parts admiration and mild affront. Remarkable. The east wing was as Kaelin had described it. A room with a sea view, stone walls that had absorbed enough salt air to smell faintly of the ocean, a fire already lit by someone who had anticipated their arrival with quiet efficiency. A window that looked directly out over the headland, over the cliff edge, over the pewter-gray expanse of the winter sea. Marina stood at that window for a long time. She stood there until the last of the light left the water and the sea became a sound rather than a sight. The deep, rhythmic breath of it against the base of the cliffs, the one sound she had never been able to decide whether she found comforting or unbearable because it was, at various times in her life, both. The call stirred again, stronger now. The proximity to the water, the ground beneath her feet, and what it remembered. The fact that she was standing on land that had been in constant conversation with the sea for generations. All of it feeding the deep awareness that lived in her, the way the tide lived in the ocean. Not chosen, not managed, simply present. She placed her palm flat against the stone wall. The stone was cold, old, patient. Beneath it, she could feel, not quite hear, more than simply sense, the way the land held this place. The way Ravencliff Keep sat on its headland, the way something sits when it has been there long enough to become part of the ground, rather than a thing placed on top of it. And through that, faintly, like a signal through deep water, the awareness of the man in the other part of this keep, his presence in the land, the way an alpha's presence is in the land they govern. Not a metaphor, not a political arrangement, but a genuine and physical fact. The land recognized its alpha, the way water recognizes its channel. It knew where he was. It oriented toward him. And the call, which was ancient and patient and extraordinarily difficult to deceive, was noticing all of it. Marina removed her hand from the wall. She had been in this building for 40 minutes. She was already in trouble. Dinner happened in a smaller room off the main hall, not the formal dining space, which Kaelin apparently used for territory business, and avoided at other times with the specific aversion of a man who has sat through too many formal meals and found them to be a poor use of everyone's time. This room was smaller, warmer, with a round table and a fire and no ceremony. A woman named Dava, solid, gray-haired, with the expression of someone who has been running a household for 20 years and will run it for 20 more, regardless of what unusual guests arrive, set down a meal without commentary, and departed with the efficiency of a force of nature that had other things to attend to. Cato sat across from Marina with the settled contentment of a man who had brought 2 people back together, navigated a complex conversation on a frost-covered road, and felt that this entitled him to a good meal. He served himself with enthusiasm. "So," he said, with the conversational energy of someone opening a topic they have been waiting to open. "The call of tides." "Cato," Kaelin said, We discussed it." "You discussed it," Cato said. "I was outside, talking to the horses." He looked at Marina. "They're good listeners, but limited on the specific details of ancient sea bindings." He picked up his fork. "I have gaps." Marina looked at Kaelin. He looked at her with an expression that said plainly, "This will not stop until addressed." She considered. Then she told Cato the version she had told Kaelin. The anchor, the rhythm, the consequences of an unmoored sea. She watched him the way she watched everyone, for what moved beneath the surface, and what she found was what she had found on the road. Genuine attention, genuine concern, directed not at the abstract problem of the tides, but at the specific reality of the coastal villages, the fishing families, the people whose lives had been built at the edge of the water. "The South Haven flooding," Cato said, when she finished. He had set down his fork at some point during the telling. Old Marin's fish-drying operation was in the surge zone. She's been running that place since before Kaylin took the territory. Her family built it. He paused. She rebuilt it after the flooding. Wouldn't discuss leaving. Said the sea had always been fair to her family and one bad season wasn't an argument. He said it without drama, just as a fact. The kind of fact that lands differently because of its specificity, because it has a name in it, and a history, and a person who made a choice to stay. The sea was being honest with her, Marina said quietly. It wasn't a bad season. It was a warning. Then we honor the call, Cato said, directly, with the flat certainty of someone for whom the path from problem to solution is a short walk once the problem is clear. He looked at Kaylin. We honor the call, Kaylin. Old Marin rebuilt her fish-drying operation in the surge zone. That's not a conversation I want to have with her. Something passed between the two men. Fast, fluent, the wordless communication of people who have been through enough together to have developed a shared language that didn't require words. Kaylin looked at Marina. Tell me what proximity means, he said. Specifically, the call requires proximity. What does that look like in practice? Marina set down her own fork. She had been waiting for this question since the moment she walked back through the coastal shelter door, had been organizing the answer in the back of her mind across the entire afternoon's ride, measuring it, deciding how much of it to give and in what order. The sea requires that we learn each other, she said. That's the most accurate way I can put it. Not perform a connection, not execute a ceremony. The call predates ceremony. It predates law. She met his eyes. It requires that the bond between the surface partner and the last mermaid be real, grown from actual time, actual knowing. A pause. I cannot tell you exactly how long it takes, because the sea doesn't measure in days. It measures in truth. Kaylin was looking at her with the careful attention of someone receiving information they are simultaneously processing and storing. You would need to stay here, he said. Yes. At the keep. Yes. With access to the sea. The call won't strengthen if I'm kept from the water. She held his gaze. I don't require the deep places at all times. I can be on land. But I need the shore, the regular contact with the tide. She paused. And the land's awareness of me needs to grow. That happens through proximity, through being somewhere long enough for the ground to know you. Cato, who had been listening with the focused silence of a man saving his commentary for the right moment, chose this moment. So what you're describing, he said, is essentially the two of you spending extended time together in close proximity, while the ocean takes notes. Marina looked at him. Yes, she said. Essentially. Right. Cato picked his fork back up. I just wanted to make sure I understood correctly, for the record. He resumed eating with the serene composure of a man who is very pleased with himself and seeing no reason to conceal it. This is going to be very interesting. Cato, Kaylin said. I know. He waved the fork slightly. I'm just noting that of all the ways this assignment could have developed, this is by far the most narratively satisfying, and I wanted on record that I had a feeling about this from the moment I saw the scale. He paused. I have good instincts. You have opinions, Kaylin said. They're not the same thing. Mine frequently overlap, Cato said serenely. Later, after the meal, after Cato had excused himself with the energy of a man who had perfectly timed his exit, after Deva had cleared the table with the same wordless efficiency with which she'd set it, Marina stood again at the window of the east wing. The sea was invisible now, fully dark, but its voice was constant, the deep, rhythmic breath of the tide against the cliffs below. She had her palm on the glass. She was not thinking about anything in particular. She was simply being near the water, which was sometimes all the call required. Presence. Attention. The willingness to listen to what the deep places were saying without filtering it through what you wanted to hear. What the deep places were saying tonight was complicated. There was a knock at the door. She turned. "Come in." Kaylin opened the door and stood in the frame. He did not come in, just stood there with one hand on the door frame and the low light of the corridor behind him, and looked at her at the window with an expression she had not seen from him before. Not the controlled authority, not the careful assessment. Something quieter. Something that had perhaps been there since the beach, and was only now letting itself be visible. "I wanted to." He stopped. Started again. "The room is adequate?" "The room is more than adequate," Marina said. "You came to check on the room." A pause. The corner of his mouth moved. "I came," he said, "to tell you that the east wing door to the cliff path is unlocked. The path leads down to the shore." He met her eyes. "If you need the water tonight." Marina looked at him. She thought about what Cato had said on the frost-pale road. He stood at a window for 4 minutes. Exactly once. She thought about the unlocked door, about the man who had rejected her this morning on incomplete information and had accounted for it by evening. About the Alpha King who asked permission before carrying a half-drowned woman and came to her door at night not with demands but with a path to the shore. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, began to pull the door closed. "Kaylin," she said. He stopped. She had not used his name before. She had not decided to use it now. It had simply arrived, carried forward by something below the level of deliberate choice. The deep place awareness, perhaps. Or something older than that. He looked at her across the room. "The call is already responding," she said quietly. "To the land. To the keep." She paused. "To you." She held his gaze with the directness that was the only way she knew how to say important things. "I thought you should know that." Something moved across his face, slow, genuine, uncontained by any of the usual architecture. Not surprise. Something older than surprise. The expression of someone who has felt something they couldn't name and has just been given the name. "I know," he said. He said it simply, the way he said everything true. Then he closed the door, and his footsteps moved away down the corridor, and Marina turned back to the window, to the dark sea beyond the glass, to the tide breathing against the cliffs of Ravencliff in its ancient, patient rhythm. The call stirred in her chest like something that had been waiting a very long time, and had finally, at the end of a very long day, decided it was allowed to rest. Just a little. Just for now. She learned the keep the way she had always learned places. Through her feet. In the deep places, orientation happened through the body first. The current against your skin told you direction. The temperature gradient told you depth. The pressure told you proximity to the floor. You did not navigate the ocean with your eyes. You navigated it with everything else, with the full, attentive surface of yourself, and the ocean told you where you were in return. The keep was not so different, Marina discovered, once she stopped expecting it to be. She woke each morning before the light and took the cliff path down to the shore, the one Kaylin had told her about, the east wing door always unlocked, the path steep and stone-cut and salt-worn into smoothness by however many years of feet. The shore at the base of the cliffs was narrow, a strip of dark sand and rounded stone that only existed at low tide, swallowed by the sea when the water rose. But it was enough. She would stand at the tide line and let the cold water run over her feet and feel the call settle in her chest, like a compass finding north. The sea was still talking, still patient, still working out what to make of this particular shore, and the particular human presence that lived on the headland above it. She was working out what to make of it, too. On the third morning, she came back up the cliff path to find Kaylin standing at the top of it, not waiting, or not exactly waiting. He was doing the thing she had observed him doing in other moments, the thing she had come to think of privately as his particular version of stillness, standing with his weight balanced and his eyes on the water below with the focused, unhurried attention of a man who is not performing patience, but simply has it. He had his hands in the pockets of a plain dark coat. The wind was doing the same things to his hair it always did, which he was not acknowledging, which she had also come to expect. He heard her on the path. She knew he heard her, the slight shift in his posture when she was 10 feet below the top, the way he did not turn but became more still, the way some people become more still when they are aware of being listened to. She came up the last steps and stood beside him. The sea spread out below them, gray-green in the early light, moving in long, slow swells. The sun was just beginning its winter consideration of the horizon. "How early do you do this?" Marina said. "Early enough," he said. "That's not an answer." "Before the household wakes," he said. "Generally. It's the only part of the day that belongs entirely to itself." He paused. "You?" "Before the tide turns," she said. "The call settles better against an incoming tide than an outgoing one." He absorbed that. The way he absorbed most things she told him about the call and the deep places, without performance, without the wide-eyed fascination that some people produced when confronted with things outside their experience, and that Marina had always found subtly exhausting. He just received it, added it to whatever map he was building, made space for it. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sea. "The eastern pools," he said. "I sent scouts yesterday. The pattern has stabilized over the last 2 days." He looked at her briefly. "You've been here 3 days." Marina said nothing, but she felt the call acknowledge it. A low, satisfied pulse, like something that has been waiting to be confirmed. "It responds to proximity," she said. "Yes," he said. "You told me that." A pause. "I wanted to see it." She looked at him. At the profile she had been looking at for 3 days now, on the cliff road, across the dinner table, in the corridor outside her room, and which had, in 3 days, not become any less worth looking at, which was, frankly, inconvenient. "You could have asked me," she said. "I wanted to observe it directly," he said. "There's a difference between being told something and watching it be true." Marina thought about that. "That's how the sea works," she said. "It doesn't accept reports. It requires direct experience." He looked at her then. The long, direct look that she had catalogued many times and continued to find difficult to prepare for. The one that had no social cushioning around it, no managed distance, just the full, unfiltered presence of his attention landing on her face like weather. "Then we have something in common," he said. Marina looked at the sea. "Stop that," she told herself. The sea, predictably, did not help. The keep had rhythms. Marina learned them the way she learned tides, by being present for enough of them that the pattern became visible. Kaylin was in the map room from mid-morning through early afternoon, dealing with the territory's operational concerns with the flat, methodical efficiency of someone for whom governance was not a performance but a practice. He read everything himself, signed nothing without reading it. Asked questions of the people who brought him documents that were, Marina gathered from Cato's occasional commentary, considerably more detailed than those people expected, and occasionally uncomfortable in their precision. He once asked the Eastern Supply Coordinator to explain the third line of a grain inventory report. Cato told her one afternoon, when they were walking the outer wall. Marina had developed a habit of walking the outer wall in the afternoons, finding that the elevation and the sea view and the cold air were useful for thinking, and Cato had developed a corresponding habit of joining her. The coordinator had written sundry provisions. See attached. Was there an attachment? Marina said. There was not, Cato said, with the expression of someone who had witnessed the subsequent conversation and filed it under formative experiences. Kaylin spent 20 minutes asking increasingly specific questions about what sundry meant in this context, until the coordinator had effectively written the attachment verbally from memory. He paused. The coordinator now attaches thorough documentation to everything, preemptively, just in case. Does it work? Marina said. Kaylin still reads all of it, Cato said, but now he reads it in silence instead of asking questions. So, net improvement, I'd say. Marina had smiled at that. Actually smiled. She had caught herself doing it, and immediately arranged her face back to something more neutral, but Cato had seen it, and the slight satisfied tilt of his expression afterward had told her he'd been keeping score. He was always keeping score, gently, without agenda. The score he was keeping was simply, is Marina all right? And the metric was frequency of actual smiles versus performed ones. She had not told him she'd noticed. She suspected he knew anyway. The afternoons she spent on the shore or in the East Wing, working through what the call required and how to explain it to someone who had no frame of reference for it. She had started leaving notes. Not for Kaylin specifically, just writing things down the way you write things down when you are trying to think clearly, and the thinking is complicated enough to require an external surface. On the 4th day, she came back to the East Wing to find Kaylin in the corridor outside her door. Not inside. Outside, standing at a deliberate, appropriate distance from the door, with a rolled document in his hands, and the expression of a man who had a practical reason for being here, and was not going to pretend otherwise. The coastal report came in from the Southern Scouts, he said. The flooding pattern in South Haven has been stable for 4 days. He extended the document. I thought you'd want to see the numbers. Marina took it, unrolled it. Read it with the focused attention of someone for whom the numbers were not abstract. They were tide cycles. They were pressures. They were the deep places speaking in the language that surface instruments could barely approximate, but could sometimes, if you knew what to look for, catch the edge of. She read it twice. The northern inlet, she said, pointing at a figure near the bottom of the page. This cycle length. Has it always been this long? Kaylin leaned in slightly to look at where she was pointing. Close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him, the specific gravity of his presence at that proximity. Not intrusive, not managed, just present in the way that his presence was always present, which was more fully than most people managed. I can check the historical records, he said. We have tide documentation going back 30 years. I need the last 18 months, Marina said. And the corresponding storm records for the same period, if you have them. We have them, he straightened. I'll have Dava pull the archive files. Marina rolled the document, looked at it for a moment, then looked at him. You read the tide documentation, she said. Not a question. I read everything, he said, with the flat factual quality that told her this was not a boast, but simply a description. Do you understand it? No, he said. I understand what the numbers tell me. I don't understand why they do what they do. A pause. I've been waiting, apparently, for someone to explain it. Marina looked at him. She thought about the tide court, about the way knowledge had been kept stratified there. The council knew everything. The voice knew almost everything. Everyone else knew what they were permitted to know. She had grown up in that structure, had been shaped by it, had only in the last 3 weeks begun to fully understand what it had cost her to exist inside a system built on the controlled distribution of understanding. Come to the shore tonight, she said. When the tide turns, I'll show you what the numbers mean. Something in his expression shifted, that small, unguarded movement that he rarely permitted and seemed not entirely able to control. All right, he said. They went down the cliff path at dusk, When the light was going and the tide was beginning its long, slow turn from outgoing to incoming, Marina led because she knew the path now, had walked it enough times in enough light and dark to know every step, every place where the stone was loose and the frost made it treacherous. She heard Kaelin behind her, steady, unhurried, his footing certain on the path with the ease of someone who had also walked it many times, probably since he was young enough that the path existed in his body the way home paths do. The shore at the base was in the brief window of its widest. Low tide, the dark sand extended 15 feet before the rock ledges began. The sea moved quietly, the long evening swells rolling in with the particular gentleness of water that is not in a hurry, that has time, that has always had time. Marina took off her shoes at the tide line. She heard Kaelin stop behind her. She stepped forward into the cold water, shallow here, ankle deep, shockingly cold in the way that the winter sea is always shockingly cold, and stood, and let the call do what it did when she was at the tide line. Expand. Open. Extend outward through the water in a way that was not a power, not a magic in any dramatic sense, more like the way a tuning fork extends a frequency into the air around it. She was in the water, and the water knew her, and the call rang outward through it like a note finding its proper resonance. She turned back to Kaelin. He was standing at the dry edge of the sand, hands at his sides, watching her with an expression she could not categorize. His dark eyes were doing something in the fading light that she had not seen from them before. Open in a way that was not professional, not controlled, not the managed version of himself he offered to everything that required managing. "Come here," she said. He walked to the tide line. She held out her hand. He looked at it. "You need to feel it," she said. "Not just be told about it. Direct experience, remember?" The corner of his mouth moved. He took her hand. Marina felt several things simultaneously, in the layered way of the deep places where multiple currents run at different depths, and you feel all of them at once. She felt his hand, warm against the cold of the water and the salt air, larger than hers, the grip of it certain rather than tentative. She felt the call register the contact the way it registered everything at the tide line, precisely, fully, without editorializing. And she felt the land's awareness of him, channeled through the water, meeting the sea's awareness of her. And she felt, in the deep, wordless language of the call, the recognition between them. Not thunder, not a dramatic shift in the air, just two currents meeting and the water moving differently after. She walked him forward into the tide. The water came to his boots, and she said nothing, and after a moment he stepped out of the boots entirely. She heard him do it without looking, heard the quiet decision of it, and he was beside her in the cold tide, and she could feel through their joined hands the moment the water reached him. The moment the sea took its first, careful measure of the man who governed the land above these cliffs. "What do you feel?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Around them the tide moved, patient and enormous. "Pressure," he said. "Not physical. Something," he paused. "Like the territory, when I walk the borders, there's a recognition. It knows I'm there." "Yes," Marina said. "The sea is learning you. It does this with everyone who comes into the water, but for the partner of the call, it's deeper, more specific." She felt his grip tighten slightly, not with alarm, just with the specific attention of a person who is feeling something new and is trying to be accurate about it. "It's cataloging you, your weight in the land, your history with this territory, everything the ground knows about you." "Everything?" he said. "Everything it has access to," Marina said, "which is considerable." A pause. The tide came in around their feet, receded, came in again. "That should probably concern me more than it does," he said. "Most people find it unsettling," she said. "I find it..." He stopped. Tried again. I find it like being read by someone who has no interest in anything but the truth. Marina looked at him. The last of the light was in the water now, refracted and blue, and in it his face was different. The controlled surface of him softened by the specific democracy of dusk, which makes everyone look a little more like what they actually are. The sea has no patience for pretense, she said. That's what the council couldn't tolerate. The call would have told the truth about all of them. And about you? He said. She felt the question move through her. Not intrusively, just honestly, the way the tide moves. Yes, she said. About me too. He was looking at her. In the water, their hands still joined, and neither of them had moved to change that. And the call was doing something in her chest that she would have been more comfortable categorizing as purely procedural if it had felt even slightly more procedural than it did. What is it telling you? He said. Right now. About this. Marina looked at the water, at the tide moving around their feet, at the long, patient sea. That the binding is taking, she said quietly. That the land and the sea are starting to recognize each other again. Through us. She paused. That it's working. And, he said. She looked at him. And that the sea, she said carefully, is not particularly concerned with the distinction between what's procedural and what isn't. He held her gaze in the blue dusk light, and she held his, and for a moment there was nothing in the world except the tide coming in, and the call ringing outward through the water, and the warm, certain weight of his hand in hers, and the sea taking its careful measure of both of them and finding, apparently, what it was looking for. Then from the top of the cliff path, with the cheerful, carrying voice of a man who had absolutely been watching from the headland. The kitchen is serving hot soup, Cato called down. Just noting, in case the tide communing schedule has room for dinner. No pressure, plenty of soup. A pause. Plenty of soup, he added with emphasis. Marina looked at the cliff, then at Kaelin. Something in his expression moved. Slow, genuine. The kind of thing that starts in the eyes before the rest of the face knows what to do with it. Not quite a smile, but the undeniable direction of one. He's been up there the whole time, Marina said. Almost certainly, Kaelin said. Does he do that often? He calls it supervisory presence, Kaelin said. I call it a considerable invasion of privacy, and he calls that a difference of professional philosophy. Marina looked at the water one more time. At the tide coming in, at the place where their feet had been, and the sea had taken the first real measure of the partnership the call required. Then she released his hand, and walked back up the shore to where his boots sat at the tide line, and picked them up, and held them out. He took them with the exact expression of a man who did not know what to do with small kindnesses, and was trying not to show that. She turned toward the cliff path. Cato, she called upward. Here, he called back immediately, definitively. Is there bread with the soup? A short pause, the quality of which suggested he was checking. There is, he confirmed. Dava made it this afternoon. It's very good. Then we're coming up, Marina said. She started up the cliff path, and behind her she heard Kaelin follow. And above them Cato made a sound of quiet, deeply satisfied victory that he was making no effort to conceal. And the tide came in behind them over the dark sand, and the sea kept its own counsel about everything it had just learned, which was, as it turned out, quite a lot. She was almost asleep when she heard it. Not a sound. Something below sound. The particular frequency that the call used when it was showing her things, rather than simply recording them. She had been half dreaming. The exhausted, shallow dreaming of someone whose body has been very cold and very uncertain for weeks, and has only recently begun to believe that it might be allowed to rest. What the call showed her was not a vision, more like a knowing, a piece of information arriving fully formed, the way deep water sometimes surfaces a thing you lost weeks ago and deposits it at your feet on the shore. Soren knew where she was. Not her specific location, But the call had been active. The stabilization of the tide pools, the patterns settling, the faint returning rhythm of the deep places responding to the partnership beginning. And Soren, who had spent 7 years studying the call through her, who knew its signatures better than almost anyone alive, would feel those changes. He would know the binding had found its partner. He would come. Marina lay in the dark of the east wing and looked at the ceiling and felt the warmth of the keep around her, the fire, the stone, the sea sound from the window, and understood, with the flat, tired clarity that arrives at the end of a long day when the pretending has stopped, that the version of forward she'd been beginning to believe in was more fragile than it had felt in the blue dusk light at the tide line. She had 3 weeks, perhaps 4, then everything she had built here would need to be strong enough to hold against the man who had trained her, who knew her better than anyone, who had decided, with the specific cold calculation of someone who treats knowledge as property, that the call of tides belonged to him. Let it be enough time, she thought, to the sea, to the call, to whatever patient and ancient thing was listening. Outside, the tide kept coming in. Soren arrived on a Tuesday. Marina knew it was Tuesday because Cato had a system. He assigned each day of the week a specific commentary, and Tuesday was, in his taxonomy, the most dishonest day of the week, neither the misery of Monday nor the honest despair of Wednesday, pretending to be progress when it's actually just Monday with better posture. He had explained this system on her 5th day at the keep, during one of their wall walks, and Marina had found it simultaneously absurd and oddly accurate. Tuesday, as it turned out, was also the day that the thing she had been dreading arrived. She felt it first from the shore. She had gone down early, as she always did, the tide turning, the call settling into its morning orientation, the sea cold and clear and honest in the winter light. She was standing at the tide line when the water changed, not dramatically, not with the theatrical violence of storms, just a shift in the frequency. The specific, recognizable disturbance of deep-placed knowledge moving toward her from a distance, like a sound you hear before you understand it, like the pressure change before weather arrives. She knew that frequency. She had spent 7 years learning it, being shaped by it, trusting it. She was back up the cliff path and in the east wing before the sun had cleared the horizon. She found Cato first. He was in the corridor outside the map room with a cup of something hot and the expression of a man who had already had more morning than he'd budgeted for. "There's a delegation at the outer gate," he said when he saw her face. "Arrived at first light. 3 people, riding Tide Court colors." He paused. "I was coming to find you." Marina felt the cold, not the sea cold, the interior kind, move through her chest and settle. "One of them," she said. "Tall, dark coat. The way he stands, like he owns the ground he's on," Cato said. "Yes." His voice was careful. "Someone you know." "His name is Soren," Marina said. Cato was quiet for a moment in the way that people with quick minds are quiet when they are moving pieces together faster than they're letting show. "The one who trained you," he said. "The one who exiled you." "Yes." "And he's at our gate," Cato said, with the specific flatness of someone arriving at a conclusion they find deeply unwelcome. "At dawn, 3 weeks after you arrived here and the call began to stabilize." He looked at her steadily. "Marina, does he know about the binding? About Kaelin being the surface partner?" "He will have felt the call responding," Marina said. "He's studied it long enough to read the signatures. He may not know the specifics yet, but he knows enough to come." Cato set down his cup with a deliberateness that told her he was working hard to keep his expression neutral. "Kaelin is in the map room," he said. "He needs to know before he meets them." "Yes," Marina said. "He does." She paused. "And there are things he needs to know that I haven't. That I should have." She stopped. The sentence had too many pieces and not enough of the right words for any of them. Cato looked at her with the direct, uncomplicated perception that she had come to rely on more than she'd intended to. "Tell him," he said simply. "All of it, before Soren gets inside these walls and tells him his version." He picked his cup back up. "I'll delay the delegation. I'm extremely good at bureaucratic obstruction when motivated." He paused. "Tell him everything, Marina." Marina looked at the map room door. "Everything," she said, more to herself than to Cato. "Everything," he confirmed, and walked away in the direction of the outer gate with the purposeful ease of a man who has identified his task and is fully committed to it. The map room was warm and smelled of paper and pine resin, and the specific focused quiet that accumulated around Kaelin when he was working. He was at the central table when Marina opened the door. The Tide documentation she had requested spread before him, the archive files open, his handwriting in the margins, in the small, precise script she had learned to recognize over 2 weeks of shared evenings. He looked up. He saw her face. He set down the pen. "Sit down," he said, not a command, in the same tone he'd used on the beach, that deliberate lowering. The "I can see something is wrong and I am making space for it." Marina sat. She placed her hands flat on the table, looked at them for a moment, and then looked at him. "Soren is at the outer gate," she said, "with 2 others. He's come from the Tide court." Kaelin's jaw tightened by a fraction. "The man who exiled you." "Yes." Marina took a breath. Let it out. "I need to tell you some things before he comes inside. Things I should have told you before now." She held his gaze. "I kept them back because I was afraid of what you'd do with them. And it was wrong. Not strategic. Wrong. And I'm telling you now because you deserve the truth before someone else offers you their version of it." Kaelin said nothing. He was still, with the complete, attentive stillness of a man who is listening with his full self and has decided not to speak until he's heard everything. Marina told him. She told him about the full terms of the Call of Tides, not the partial version she had offered in the coastal shelter and the map room and the dinner table conversations, but all of it. The anchor and the rhythm and the partnership, the specific nature of what the sea required from the surface partner and the last mermaid, the way the binding deepened over time, through proximity, through knowing, through the accumulation of real, unperformed connection. She told him that what the call built between its 2 participants was not simply a diplomatic arrangement or a territorial protection, that it was something the sea treated as a bond. That once honored, it could not be partially honored. That the ocean did not understand halfway. She watched him receive this. She watched the understanding arrive in stages. First the framework of it, then the implications, then the specific and personal weight of what the implications meant for him, for his territory, for the decision he had made, in good faith, but with incomplete information, when he had agreed to be the surface partner. She told him about Soren, all of it this time, not just the exile, the years before it, the training, the trust that had been real on her side and, she now understood, instrumental on his. The way he had spent 7 years learning the call through her, studying its signatures, mapping its requirements, all with the aim of controlling it. Of using the binding as a tool of territorial expansion, a sea connection, owned and directed by the Tide Council, leveraged against every coastal territory within reach. She told him that Soren had not exiled her because she was a danger. He had exiled her because she had understood what he was doing, because she had gone to the council with the evidence and discovered, too late, that the council had known all along. When she finished, the map room was very quiet. The fire, the distant sea, the sound of her own breathing, which was, she was distantly aware, slightly uneven in the way of someone who has been holding something for a long time and has just put it down and feels both lighter and terrified. Kaelin had not moved during the telling. He was still at the table across from her, his hands flat on the Tide documentation, his face doing something she could not read. Or rather, something she could read well enough to be frightened by. The absence of expression. The specific contained quality of a man who is feeling something large and has not yet decided what to do with it. "You came to my territory," he said finally. His voice was even. Careful even. The kind of even that takes effort. "Yes," Marina said. "You came to my territory, and you told me the binding required a surface partner, and you let me agree to it without telling me what the binding actually was." A pause. What it would actually mean. "Yes." The word cost something. She let it. "You decided," he said, "how much information I needed. You measured it. Gave me what you thought I could handle." Something moved in his eyes. Fast. Controlled. Genuine. The same thing the Tide Court did to you. The sentence landed like the tide against stone. Not violent, not aggressive. Just the precise, inevitable weight of water meeting something solid. Marina felt it hit. Felt the truth of it move through her in the specific, humbling way that real truths move. Not from the outside in, but from the inside out, confirming something she had known and had not wanted to know. "Yes," she said. Her voice was quiet. "I did." Kaelin stood. He walked to the window, the one that faced inland, not the sea. And she understood that was deliberate, that he had chosen the direction that was not hers, and stood there with his back to her and his hands at his sides and the flat, gray morning light on his face. "I agreed to something," he said, without full information, on the basis of a partial truth delivered by someone I was beginning to. He stopped. His jaw worked. "I need to think." "I know," Marina said. "Soren can wait in the outer courtyard," he said. "He'll wait because this is my territory, and I am choosing the terms of his access." A pause, and the authority in his voice was not performed. It was simply there, the bedrock thing, unchanged by what he was feeling. "You will stay in the East Wing until I've thought. We will speak again before I meet him." Marina stood. Kaelin. Marina. He did not turn around. His voice had changed. Not cold, not cruel. Something more complicated than either. The voice of a man who is managing something very large and is asking, quietly, for the space to do it. "Please." Marina looked at his back. At the line of his shoulders. At the contained, genuine pain of a person who trusted slowly and had just discovered that the trust had been built on a foundation with a hidden floor. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. "What I kept from you," she said to his back, to the gray inland light, to the space between them that felt larger than the room, was not. It was not the way he kept things from me. I need you to know that. I was afraid of being sent away again, of telling you everything and watching you make the same decision you made on the beach. Her hand tightened on the frame. That's not the same as what Soren did, but it was wrong, and I'm sorry. She did not wait to see if he turned around. She walked out, down the corridor, through the East Wing and out onto the cliff path and down to the shore, where the tide was fully in now. The narrow beach swallowed, the sea pressed up against the base of the cliffs with the patient, enormous presence of something that has no concept of waiting because it has never needed one. She stood at the edge of where the water met the stone. She pressed her palms flat against the cliff face, her back to the sea, and breathed. The call was very quiet, not absent. It never went absent. It was as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. But quiet in the specific way of something that is listening rather than speaking, waiting to see what she would do with this. "I know," she said, to it, to the stone, to herself. She stayed there for a long time. Cato found her 2 hours later. He came down the path with the careful footing of someone who had done it enough to know the treacherous places, and a wrapped cloth tucked under his arm that turned out, when he settled on a flat rock above the waterline, to contain bread and a small portion of salt pork. He sat beside her without speaking, for long enough that she understood he was choosing the silence, offering it. That he had come not to fill the space but to occupy it with her, which was different. Finally, "How bad?" he said. "He compared me to Soren," Marina said. Cato was quiet for a moment. "Did he say that directly?" "More or less." "Did he mean it as a comparison or as—" He paused. "Kalen says hard things when he's hurt. He says the exact hardest true thing he can find, because he thinks the truth should be said clearly even when it costs something. It's one of his better qualities, operating at the wrong moment." Marina looked at the water. "It was true," she said. "That's the part I can't argue with." Cato turned to look at her. "Marina, what you kept from him is not what Soren did to you. Soren studied you for 7 years, and then used everything he learned to dismantle you. You were afraid and you protected yourself, and you should have told him sooner, and you know that." He held her gaze. "But the thing you're doing right now, where you're accepting the full weight of that comparison—" "He's angry," Marina said. "He has the right to be." "He's hurt," Cato said. "Those are different. And yes, he has the right to be. And he'll work through it, because that's what he does. He takes the difficult thing and carries it until he understands it completely. And then he decides what to do with it from the clearest possible position." He paused. "He's also—" He stopped. "What?" Cato looked at the sea for a moment. "He asked me, the second night you were here, whether I thought the call would take longer if the surface partner was resistant. He said the word with a particular, careful neutrality. I told him I had no idea. He said he'd been thinking about it, and he thought perhaps the sea's measure of genuine connection and the surface partner's own feelings were probably not unrelated." Marina looked at him. "He asked you that," she said. "On the second night," Cato confirmed. "Before you'd told him most of what you've told him since. Before the tide line. Before—" He gestured vaguely at the accumulated weight of the last 2 weeks. "He was already asking the question before he had a reason to." Marina turned to look at the water. The call stirred in her chest. Not the quiet of earlier. Something more active. Something that felt, in the wordless language it used for things it considered important, like "pay attention to this." "Soren is still at the gate," she said. "Kalen has him in the outer courtyard," Cato said. "Hot drink, a fire, and Ren standing nearby being extremely still and quietly intimidating, which is Ren's most effective mode." He paused. "Soren has been very charming to everyone who's interacted with him." "He's always charming," Marina said. "Yes," Cato said. "The charming ones are always the most expensive." He held out the bread. "Eat something. Kalen will come when he's ready. And when he does, tell him whatever you haven't told him yet." Marina took the bread. "I've told him everything," she said. "Everything about the call," Cato said. "Yes." He looked at her with the direct, gentle precision of someone who sees clearly and has decided to say so. "Have you told him why you turned around on the road?" Marina held the bread. The tide moved against the cliff below their feet, cold and patient and present. "That's different," she said. "Is it?" Cato said. He did not push. He never pushed. That was the specific quality of his kind of attention, the reason it worked. He offered the question, and then let it be. The way you set something down carefully rather than pressing it into someone's hands. Marina looked at the sea. No, it was not different. She had turned around on the road because the call required it. That was true. She had turned around because of the coastal villages. That was also true. She had turned around because Cato had told her about the man standing at a window for 4 minutes, and that, she understood now, on this cliff above the winter sea, with the bread in her hands, and the call ringing quietly in her chest, had been the reason that mattered most. She had turned around because of him. She had not told him that. The call, patient and ancient, and entirely without mercy, pulsed once in her chest like something that had been waiting for her to arrive at this conclusion, and was glad finally that she had. "When he comes," Marina said quietly, "I'll tell him." "Good," said Cato. He reached over and broke off a piece of the salt pork with the comfortable ease of a man who has done everything he came to do and is now simply enjoying the morning. Below them, the tide breathed in and out. Above them, the keep held its position on the headland, patient as stone, waiting for the people inside it to find their way back to each other. And at the outer gate, in the courtyard, the charming man in the dark coat drank his hot drink and smiled at Wren, and waited with the specific, unhurried patience of someone who had spent years learning exactly when to arrive. Kaelin came to the cliff path an hour before noon. Marina heard his footsteps above her before she saw him, that particular rhythm she had learned without intending to, the even, deliberate pace of someone who moves through the world with the same quality of attention he brings to everything else. She looked up from the flat rock where she and Cato had been sitting, and Cato, with the timing of a man who has spent 15 years reading situations correctly, stood, brushed the crumbs from his coat, said, "I'll go check on the soup," with the serene composure of someone who has not once in his life had anything to do with soup preparation, and walked back up the path. Kaelin came the rest of the way down. He stopped at the edge of where the path met the shore, hands at his sides, the wind doing its usual indifferent work on his coat and hair. He looked at Marina. She looked at him. His face was not what it had been in the map room. The contained, complicated pain was still present. She could see it. She had learned to read his face in the specific way you learn to read a landscape you have been walking for weeks. But it had been carried somewhere. Processed, at least partially, in the way he processed difficult things, directly, completely, without flinching away from the parts that hurt most. He sat on the flat rock Cato had vacated. He did not speak immediately. He looked at the water for a moment, at the tide pulling back from the cliff base in the long, slow exhale of late morning, and Marina watched him and waited. "I've been sitting with what you told me," he said. "I know," Marina said. "I said something unfair." He looked at her. Direct. No cushioning. The comparison to Soren. "What you did was not what he did. I knew that when I said it, and I said it anyway because..." He stopped. His jaw worked slightly. "Because it was the sharpest thing available, and I used it. That was wrong." Marina looked at the water. "It was also true. Parts of it," he said. "Not all of it. And a partial truth used as a weapon is its own kind of dishonesty." He was quiet for a moment. "I know the difference between someone who withholds the truth to control and someone who withholds it because they've been hurt badly enough that giving it away felt like another way to lose something." His dark eyes were steady on her face. "I know which one you are." The call moved in her chest. That low, warm pulse. The one she was learning to distinguish from the procedural readings. The one that felt less like a compass and more like a confirmation. "Cato told me," she said, "that you asked him on the second night whether the sea's measure of genuine connection and the surface partner's own feelings were probably not unrelated." Something moved across his face. Fast. Unguarded. There and then. Not hidden, exactly. Just absorbed back into the steadiness with the specific quality of a man who is not ashamed of the thing, but is still deciding how to hold it in the open. "He wasn't supposed to tell you that," Kaelin said. "He wasn't supposed to follow me on the road either," Marina said. "He seems to have a flexible relationship with instructions when he thinks the outcome justifies it." The corner of Kaelin's mouth moved. "Yes," he said. "That's been a consistent feature of his employment." A pause. The tide breathed. The wind moved across the water and found the cliff, and climbed it and passed over them both. I turned around on the road, Marina said, because of the coastal villages. That's true. She held his gaze. And because the call required it. That's also true. She paused. Let the next part arrive in its own time, because rushing it would make it smaller than it was. And because Cato told me you had stood at a window for 4 minutes. And I could not... She stopped, started again. I could not make myself care more about the road ahead than about the man who asked my permission before carrying me off a beach. The wind, the tide, the enormous, patient sea. Kaelin looked at her for a long moment. The call, he said slowly. When it's fully honored. When the binding is complete. He paused. You said the sea doesn't understand halfway. No, Marina said. It doesn't. So when it's done, he said, what we are to each other. It's permanent. It's real, Marina said. The sea doesn't create what isn't there. It only confirms it, deepens it, makes it something neither distance nor time can simply undo. She held his gaze. That's what I should have told you at the beginning. That's the full truth of it. Kaelin was still for a moment. Then he reached across the space between them on the flat rock and placed his hand over hers. Warm, certain, the same grip she remembered from the tide line. And left it there. Not a declaration, not a ceremony, just a choice, made clearly with full information by a man who did not do things by half measures. Soren, he said. Yes, Marina said. We need to talk about Soren. We do, he said, inside, together. He stood, and she stood, and he looked at her with the expression she had first seen on the beach, the one that had no performance in it, no management, just the full, present weight of his attention. Marina, when we go in there, whatever he says, whatever version of this he's brought with him, I need you to stand beside me, not behind me, not at a distance. His dark eyes were steady. Beside me, Marina felt the call ring outward through her chest like a bell that had been waiting for the right moment to sound. Yes, she said. They walked up the cliff path together, the wind at their backs, the sea below them and the keep above them and the space between them changed now, in the specific and permanent way that things change when two people have told each other the truth and chosen to stay in it. Soren was exactly as she remembered him. That was always the disorienting thing about people who had hurt you deeply. You expected them to look different. Smaller, maybe, or altered in some way that reflected what they had done. But Soren was tall and dark-coated and composed, with the precise, considered grace of a man who had spent decades in the tide court learning how to occupy a room in a way that made the room's other occupants feel like guests. He was standing at the center of Kaelin's great hall when they entered, not sitting, which Marina understood immediately as a choice. Standing was authority. Sitting was waiting. Soren never waited if he could arrange not to. He saw Marina and something moved across his face. Surprise, quickly managed, and beneath it something more complex that she had spent years misreading as affection and had finally, 3 weeks into open ocean, understood correctly. Assessment. That was what it was. Had always been what it was. Marina, he said. His voice was warm. It had always been warm. I am so relieved you're safe. Marina stood beside Kaelin in the doorway and felt the ground beneath her feet. Solid, specific, known. And said nothing. Soren, she said, after a moment. Just his name, without warmth or cold. Just the word, placed in the air between them with the flat precision of someone who has decided that nothing she offers him will be unintentional. Soren's eyes moved to Kaelin. He arranged his expression into the specific configuration of diplomatic respect. Practiced, fluent, impeccable. Alpha King Voss, he said. I apologize for the early arrival. We traveled through the night. He paused. I came as quickly as I could, given the circumstances. The circumstances, Kaelin said. His voice was even. The flat, bedrock authority that needed no performance. Meaning the exile you issued to the last mermaid, and the call of tides activating on my coast. A brief pause. Marina felt Soren recalibrate. She knew the rhythm of it, had watched it 100 times in 100 chambers. He had expected to arrive with more information than the surface partner. He had expected the information asymmetry to be his advantage. She's told you about the call, Soren said. Smooth. Adjusting. She's told me everything, Kaelin said. Another pause. Soren looked at Marina, and she met his eyes and held them without flinching. And she watched him understand that she had, in fact, told everything. Not just the framework, not just the useful parts, but the architecture of what he had done, and why, and what it had cost her. Then you understand, Soren said, pivoting with the practiced ease of someone who has done this many times. The gravity of an unsanctioned call activation. The binding between the last mermaid and a surface partner is a matter of deep place law. It cannot simply be activated without the council's permission, Marina said. Yes, I know that argument. You used it to exile me. She took a step forward, not toward Soren, but simply into the room, claiming the space the way the call had been teaching her to claim things. Fully, without apology. The call doesn't belong to the council, Soren. It never did. You spent 7 years trying to convince me that the court's authority extended over the deep places, and I spent 7 years believing you because I trusted you. She held his gaze. I was wrong to trust you. The deep places were never wrong about what the call requires. Soren looked at her. Something moved behind his composed expression. Fast, genuine. The first unmanaged thing she had seen from him in perhaps ever. You don't understand what you've started, he said, quietly. The council will not accept an unsanctioned binding. They have legal authority over the last mermaid, and by extension over the call. If you complete this, if the call is honored, Kaelin said, and his voice had changed. Not louder, not harder, but different in the specific way of a man who has moved from receiving information to stating position. The tides along my coast stabilize. My people are safe. The flooding stops. He paused. If the council objects to that, they can bring that objection to me directly, in writing, through the appropriate diplomatic channels. Another pause, and the words that followed were quiet and absolute. And they will find that the Alpha King of Ravencliff is considerably less manageable than a single exiled mermaid. Cato, who had been standing just inside the hall doorway with the expression of a man watching something he will be telling people about for years, made a sound that he converted immediately into a cough. Soren looked between them. At Kaelin, at Marina, at the space between them where something had changed that his 7 years of studying the call told him was already further along than he'd hoped. You've been here 3 weeks, he said to Marina. Something sharp beneath the smooth surface. The binding doesn't complete in 3 weeks. No, Marina said. It doesn't. Then there's still time for Soren. She used his name the way he had taught her to use names in the court, as punctuation, as a full stop. There is no version of this where I give you the call. There was never a version of that. You knew that, and you exiled me anyway, because you thought distance would give you time. She felt the call steady in her chest, not angry, not triumphant, simply certain. The sea chose this shore. The sea chose him. I am honoring what the sea chose, and you do not have the authority to stop it. The hall was very quiet. Soren looked at her for a long moment, and Marina saw it. The thing she had been waiting 3 weeks to see, the thing that fear and distance and exile had made impossible to be certain of until now. Soren had power. He had knowledge and charm, and the long, patient reach of the Tide Council behind him. But he did not have the call. He had never had it. He had only ever had her belief that he did. And she was standing in a keep on a headland above the winter sea with the Alpha King of Ravencliff at her side, and the call ringing steadily in her chest. And she did not believe that anymore. She had not believed it since the road. "You'll stay tonight," Kaelin said to Soren. "The guest quarters in the West Wing. Tomorrow morning I will receive whatever formal communication the Council wishes to send, and I will respond through the appropriate channels." His voice was final in the specific way of things that have been decided and will not be reconsidered. "Tonight, you will be comfortable and fed and treated as a guest of this territory. That is the extent of what I'm offering." Soren held Kaelin's gaze for one more moment. Then he inclined his head. One small, precise movement. The acknowledgement of a man who knows when a position has been taken that he cannot immediately shift. "Of course," he said. "Thank you for your hospitality, Alpha King." Deva appeared from the corridor as if summoned. Marina had long since accepted that Deva simply existed in multiple places simultaneously and had stopped trying to understand the mechanism, and led Soren's delegation toward the West Wing with the brisk efficiency of someone who has housed difficult guests before and found it entirely manageable. Marina stood in the empty hall and breathed. Kaelin turned to look at her. His expression was the open one, the small, unguarded version she had first seen at the tide line in the blue dusk light. "Are you all right?" he said. She thought about it honestly. She did that now. Gave his questions the actual consideration they deserved, instead of the reflexive reassurances she'd built up over years of courts and councils. "Yes," she said, and meant it. From the doorway, Cato said with enormous feeling, "That was magnificent. I want everyone to know that I was here. Historically present, witness to all of it." "You were supposed to be managing the delegation," Kaelin said. "I was managing the delegation," Cato said, "from an optimal observation position." He paused. "Ren was also there. Ren, you witnessed this." From somewhere further down the corridor, Ren said, with his characteristic economy, "Yes." "Excellent," Cato said. "We're all witnesses. The record will reflect this accurately." He looked at Marina, and behind the brightness of him was the genuine, quiet relief of someone who had been worried and was no longer. "I told you," he said simply. Marina looked at him, at Kaelin, at the hall where the call was still ringing in her chest, steady and certain. "Yes," she said. "You did." Soren left the following morning, not with argument. Marina had half expected argument, had braced for the version of him that appeared in chambers when charm had failed and calculation had to do the work overtly. But what arrived at breakfast was the composed, diplomatic surface, and what departed after it was the same, with a formal written acknowledgement of the territorial position Kaelin had stated, and a brief, private moment in the outer courtyard where Soren looked at Marina with something she had not expected. Not anger, not the cold calculation she had steeled herself for. Something that was, despite everything, almost honest. "I did teach you well," he said quietly. "Whatever else is true." Marina looked at him, at the man who had given her language for the call, who had taught her how to read the deep places, who had shaped 7 years of her understanding, and then used that understanding as a map to her weaknesses. "Yes," she said, "you did." She did not thank him. She did not forgive him. She simply acknowledged the truth in it, because the call had no patience for pretense in either direction, and she was done filtering the world through what was comfortable. Soren looked at her for one last moment. Then he mounted his horse and rode south, and the outer gate closed behind him. And Marina stood in the courtyard and felt the tension in her chest, the braced, waiting thing that had been there since Tuesday. Begin, slowly and deliberately, to release. Kaelin came to stand beside her. They watched the gate for a moment. Just the two of them, in the thin winter morning, with the keep around them and the sea audible from the far side of the headland, and the call in her chest doing something she could only describe, in the inadequate language available to her, as settling. "He'll go back to the council," Kaylin said. "Yes," Marina said. "They'll send a formal objection, eventually. And when they do," he said, "we'll answer it. We." The word arrived and stayed, sitting in the air between them with a weight that was not heavy, but was present, that was real, in the specific way the call categorized real things. Marina looked at him. "The binding," she said. "You understand what it means. Fully. You chose it with complete information." "Yes," he said. "Kaylin." She turned to face him. "I need to hear you say that. Not because I doubt it. Because the call requires that the choice is made consciously. Not by circumstance, not by necessity, not by the flooding in South Haven." She held his gaze. "By you. Choosing." He looked at her with the direct, unfiltered attention that was, she had come to understand, his version of intimacy. The full, unhurried weight of himself, present and unmanaged. "Marina Kaylin," he said. "Last of the merfolk. Voice of a court that didn't deserve you." He did not look away. "I am choosing the binding. I am choosing what it means, and what it makes us, and what the sea will confirm about something that I have been aware of since a woman on a cold beach blinked once when I asked if she understood me." A pause. "I am choosing you. Consciously, with full information, because the coastal villages matter, and because the call matters, and because—" His voice dropped just slightly. "Because I stood at a window for 4 minutes, and Cato apparently cannot keep anything to himself. And the truth is, I was not thinking about the tides." The call rang through Marina's chest like a bell being struck by something very certain. She reached up and placed her palm flat against his chest, over his heart, the way she placed her palm against the cliffstone to feel what the land remembered. She felt his heartbeat, even and certain, the same rhythm she had heard on the beach with her cheek against his coat, the rhythm that had been, from the very first night, the sound she associated with the possibility of being allowed to rest. His hand came up and covered hers, the same grip, the same warmth. "The shore," she said. "Yes," he said. They went down the cliff path together in the clear winter morning, and the sea spread before them as they descended, gray-green and enormous and moving in the long, patient swells of a body of water that has been exactly what it is since long before anyone arrived to name it. The narrow shore was at its widest, the tide fully out, the dark sand extending to the rock ledges in a strip of cold, honest ground. They waded into the tide together. No ceremony, no preparation, nothing dramatic. Just two people walking into the cold water at the edge of the world, with their hands joined, and the call ringing outward through Marina's chest, in long, deep pulses that she felt in her feet and her fingertips and the back of her throat. She closed her eyes. She felt the sea take its measure of them. Not the preliminary, careful measurement of the first night. That tentative, cataloging attention. This was different. This was the deep places doing what they did when they recognized something true, expanding outward from the point of contact, moving through the water in all directions at once, a frequency that traveled through the ocean the way a heartbeat travels through a body, low and certain, known. The call opened. She felt it in the way you feel things that are larger than you, not with any single sense but with everything at once. The connection between the land and the sea, the anchor, the rhythm of the deep places finding their channel again after weeks of searching. The specific, enormous relief of the ocean, recognizing that what it needed was here, was real, was chosen, and through it, his hand in hers, his heartbeat, which she could feel even without her ear against his chest now. the call carrying it to her through the water between them. Even. Certain. Staying. She opened her eyes. He was looking at her with the expression she had no name for, and had stopped trying to name. The one that had been building for weeks across cliff paths and dinner tables and tide lines and hard conversations in map rooms. The one that was simply, undeniably, irrevocably him. The tide came in around them. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. The water rose around their ankles, their calves, cold and relentless and entirely without interest in the moment it was interrupting, because the sea did not interrupt moments. The sea simply was, and everything else happened inside it. Kaylin reached up with his free hand and brushed salt water from her cheek. She hadn't known there was salt water on her cheek, wasn't certain whether it was the sea or something else. And his fingers stayed there for a moment, warm against the cold of the morning air, and Marina leaned into that warmth the way a tide leans into the shore it has always belonged to. He kissed her. Not urgently. Not with the hunger of someone who has been waiting too long and has run out of patience for it. With the specific, unhurried quality of a man doing something he has decided to do and is doing it completely. Present, certain, unhurried. His mouth against hers was warm and salt-tasted and real, in the way the call was real, in the way the heartbeat she had listened to on a cold beach was real, in the way things are real when they have been true for longer than you've been willing to say so. The call rang outward through the water in all directions. The deep places felt it. The tide pools along the eastern coast felt it. The pressure equalizing, the current finding its channel, the ancient rhythm of the sea remembering what it felt like to be anchored. 3 leagues south, the fishing families of South Haven would wake to a tide that was, for the first time in 8 months, exactly where it was supposed to be. Old Marin would walk out to her rebuilt fish-drying operation and stand at the tide line and feel, without knowing why, that something had been restored. She would not know what. She would not need to. Marina pulled back from the kiss to find Kaylin looking at her. The small, genuine version of his smile. The one she had been accumulating evidence of across 2 weeks of patience, and cliff paths, and hard truths, told in difficult rooms. "The call," he said. "Yes," she said. "Is it honored?" she said. "Fully." The sea confirmed it. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing the weight of that. The binding, complete, real. Permanent in the way the sea was permanent, not static, not frozen, but ongoing, continuing, renewing itself with each tide. "Good," he said. From the top of the cliff path, with the carrying, cheerful, entirely characteristic voice of a man who had absolutely been watching. "The soup," Cato called down, "is once again available. Also, and I want it noted that I have been patient for a very reasonable amount of time. Did it work?" Marina looked up at the cliff. At Cato's silhouette against the winter sky, leaning over the headland with the unrestrained curiosity of a man who has been managing his feelings about this situation for 3 weeks, and has finally arrived at the moment where he's allowed to ask directly. She looked at Kaylin. He looked at her. "Tell him yes," Kaylin said. "Yes," Marina called up. A pause. Then from the headland, a sound of pure, undiluted satisfaction. The sound of a man who had known, from the moment he saw a silver scale on a supply shelf, how this was going to end, and had spent 3 weeks being proven right. "Excellent," Cato called down. "I'll tell Dava. She's going to need to make more bread." Kaylin looked at the sky with the expression of a man who has spent 15 years with this person and has arrived, finally, at a place beyond exasperation into something that was simply fond. "He's insufferable," Kaylin said. "He's wonderful," Marina said. A pause. "Yes," Kaylin said. "He is." They waded back to shore together, the tide coming in behind them, the sea settling into its new rhythm, anchored, certain, ongoing. Marina felt the call in her chest not as a weight anymore, not as a responsibility or an obligation, or the thing she had been carrying alone since the exile. It felt like what it had always been meant to feel like. She understood now. It felt like home. Not a place, not a building or a shore or a territory. The specific, inalienable feeling of being somewhere that holds you, that knows your name and has known it, that does not require you to earn your presence in it, that simply extends its arms and says, "Here, rest. You have been in the water long enough." She picked up her shoes at the tide line. Kaelin picked up his boots. They walked up the cliff path together, toward the keep on the headland, toward the warm rooms and the steady fire and Cato's soup and Dava's bread, and the 30 years of tide documentation in the map room that Marina was going to spend the next months making sense of. Toward the life that the sea, in its ancient and patient wisdom, had apparently always known was waiting for her on this shore. She had just needed to find the shore. The morning after the binding was ordinary. That was the first thing Marina noticed when she woke in the east wing with the sea sound at the window, and the fire burned low, and the pale winter light doing its usual tentative negotiation with the sky. The keep was the same. The stone ceiling was the same. The sound of Dava, somewhere below, moving through the kitchen with the purposeful efficiency of someone who had been running this household since before any of the current dramatic events, and would continue running it long after. That was the same too. But the call in her chest was different. Not gone. Never gone. It was as much a part of her as breathing. Always had been. Always would be. But settled in a way it had never been before. The way a river settles, when it has found its proper channel. Still moving, still alive, but no longer searching. No longer pressing against the banks, wondering if this was the right direction. She lay still for a moment, and let herself feel it. This is what it was supposed to be like all along, she thought. This is what it was built for. She got up, put on her coat, and went downstairs. Kaelin was in the map room. Of course he was. She had come to understand that the map room was where he went, when he was thinking about something he wanted to think about carefully, the way some people go to specific chairs or specific windows. The tide documentation was still spread across the table, but he was not reading it. He was sitting at the edge of the table, with his hands loosely folded and his eyes on the middle distance, and he looked up when she appeared in the doorway with the expression of a man who had been waiting for her to arrive, and was not going to pretend otherwise. "How long have you been awake?" Marina said. "A while," he said, which, from Kaelin, meant since before the sun made its decision. She sat across from him. Between them, the tide documentation lay spread like a map of everything that had almost gone wrong. "The binding," she said. "I want to tell you what it means. All of it. No more partial truths." "I know," he said. "I'm listening." Marina placed her hands flat on the table. "It's permanent," she said. "The call doesn't allow for dissolution, not because either of us is trapped, but because what the sea confirms as real doesn't become unreal simply because circumstances change. The binding grows with us. It deepens over years the way the land deepens, through everything that happens in it." She held his gaze. "We are, in the language of the deep places, partnered for life. What your people might call bound mates. What the surface world calls something that doesn't have a perfect word for it." "It doesn't need a word," Kaelin said. "No," Marina said. "It doesn't." "What does it mean?" he said carefully. "For you, physically. You came to this shore in a form that isn't your only one." Marina looked at her hands. "The exile, the time in open water, the stress of it cost me the ability to shift for a while. That's what happens in extremity. The body chooses its form of least resistance and holds it." She paused. "The binding has been restoring that. The call anchored to the land. To you. It's giving back what the open ocean took. I felt it in the water yesterday. The form is returning." "Your tail," he said. "Yes," She looked at him. "I wanted to ask you, when I'm ready to show you, whether you want to see it." He looked at her with the direct, unfiltered attention that was simply how he saw things. "Marina," he said, "you are the last of the merfolk. The call is what you are. Your tale is what you are." He paused. "Of course I want to see it." She felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was still held tight. "There's more," she said. "Tell me, you." "The call has never been broken between a living last mermaid and a willing partner," she said. "In the old records, the ones I read before Soren decided I'd read enough, the binding always held until both partners were gone. Then the call passed to the next generation." She looked at the Tide documentation. "I am the last. There is no next generation of merfolk." A pause. "But the binding doesn't require merfolk to continue. The sea only requires an anchor. The call, when it passes from me, will pass to—" She stopped. "To the shore it knows," Kaelin said quietly. "To Ravencliff." "Yes," Marina said. "To the land that chose to honor it. The anchor becomes the territory itself, held in trust by whoever governs it in perpetuity." She held his gaze. "Your line, your keep, the headland above this sea. The call will live here after us." The weight of that settled over the map room slowly, the way morning light settles. Not dramatically, just present, filling the available space. "Then we'd better take good care of the headland," Kaelin said. Marina looked at him. "Yes," she said. "We'd better." The letter from the Tide Council arrived 11 days later. It was formal, precisely worded, and 3 pages long, which Marina had been able to tell from the weight of it before she opened it. She read it at the east wing window, standing with the sea visible beyond the glass, and the call settled and untroubled in her chest. The council formally objected to the activation of the Call of Tides without council authorization. They cited 14 precedents, 6 articles of deep place law, and a subclause Marina had not known existed that apparently required the last mermaid to obtain written council approval before entering into any binding agreement with a surface partner. She read all 3 pages carefully. Then she turned to page 3, where the council's formal demands were listed, and read those too. Then she sat down and wrote a response. It was 1 page. She cited the call's own original terms, not the council's interpretation of them, which Soren had spent years shaping, but the source text, which she had memorized at 16, and which predated the council's existence by approximately 4 centuries. She cited the stabilization of the Ravencliff tidal patterns as evidence of a successfully honored binding. She noted that the call recognized no authority above the sea itself, that the sea had confirmed the partnership, and that the council's authorization was therefore not a legal requirement, but a procedural preference the council had invented and added to their own records sometime in the last 100 years, without noting that it was an addition. She signed it with her full name, Marina Kaelin, voice of the Call of Tides, Ravencliff territory, and gave it to Kaelin to review. He read it once. "You left out the part," he said, "where you call their subclause procedurally invented." "I implied it," Marina said. "I find implication more elegant than accusation." "You implied it," Kaelin said, in a way that leaves them no room to pretend they didn't understand. He set the letter down. "This is very good. Soren taught me," Marina said. Then, after a moment, "That part, at least, was real." Kaelin looked at her with the steady, open attention that she had stopped bracing against. "Did you need him to be entirely bad?" he said. "For it to be all right to be done with him?" Marina considered that honestly. "No," she said finally. "He was what he was. Some of it was worth having. None of it justified what he did." She paused. "I'm done with him. That's different from pretending he never taught me anything." Kaelin nodded once, picked up his pen, countersigned the letter with the Alpha King's seal. "Send it," he said. The council's response to Marina's response arrived 3 weeks after that. It was one paragraph. It formally acknowledged the binding, cited the source text she had referenced, and noted that the council would update its records to reflect the call's original terms. There was a postscript, in different handwriting. Marina recognized it. Leora was one word. Then, "She is well. She asks if she may write to you." Marina stood at the east wing window for a long time. Then she sat down and wrote, "Yes." Soren, she learned through the same channel 2 months later, had been removed from his position on the council. Not exiled. The council did not exile its own. That was apparently a courtesy they extended only to mere folk, but relieved of authority over the call's documentation and reassigned to archival work in the lower chambers. Marina read this in Leora's third letter, which arrived with the careful, slightly formal tone of two people who loved each other and were learning, slowly and with effort, how to rebuild a bridge that had been damaged but not destroyed. She felt no satisfaction at Soren's reassignment. She felt, if she was honest, very little about Soren at all anymore. The anger had been real when she needed it. She had used it to get off a cold beach and back onto a horse and up a cliff path and into a keep on a headland above the sea. It had served its purpose, and she had set it down somewhere on the frost-pale road and had not picked it back up. What she felt about Soren, by the time Leora's third letter arrived, was something close to the feeling you have about weather that has passed. Acknowledgement of its reality, no particular wish for its return. She showed Kaylin her tale on a Thursday morning in early spring. They had gone down the cliff path before first light. His idea, which had surprised her pleasantly, the first of many small surprises she was accumulating about him, the ones that arrived when you knew someone well enough to see the things they didn't announce. He had appeared at her door before dawn with his coat and his boots, and the look of someone who had been planning this and was not entirely certain how to say so. "The tide," he said. "The full incoming. I want to be there." She had looked at him in the early dark and understood. So they went down. The shore was silver and cold in the pre-dawn, the tide coming in long and full, the sky beginning its slow negotiation with morning above the eastern horizon. Marina waded in to her waist. The cold was nothing to her now, had not really been anything since the binding completed, and the call restored the full native resistance of her body to the sea's temperatures. And she let the call do what it did when she was fully in the water. The change came slowly. It had come slowly the first time it returned, 3 weeks after the binding completed, and she had wept then, alone on the shore at dawn, with a relief so enormous she had not had words for it. Just the feeling of being whole again, of the body remembering what it was, of the ancient inherited thing that she was returning to her in the water, the way the tide returned to the shore. The silver scales rose up from her feet, climbing her legs, catching the first gray edge of morning light the way only they could catch it. That impossible iridescent sheen, the deep place color, the one that no dye in the world had ever successfully replicated. She looked at Kaylin on the shore. He was standing at the tide line with the water around his boots, and his dark eyes on her. And his expression was the one she had been learning across months of mornings and map rooms and cliff paths. The open, unguarded one. The one he did not perform. The one that simply arrived when the right person was present. He waded in. He stopped in front of her, waist deep in the incoming tide, and he looked at her, at the scales, at the silver-blue iridescence moving in the water around her, at the specific, impossible beauty of it. And then he looked at her face. "Hello," he said. Marina felt something move through her. Warm, upward. The call ringing in a key she had started to understand was specifically associated with him. "Hello," she said. He reached down, slowly, giving her every opportunity to prevent it, and touched the scales at her hip. The tips of his fingers, light, careful, the way you touch something ancient and beautiful that you have been trusted with. The scales caught the morning light and returned it changed. "They're warm," he said. He sounded surprised. "The sea isn't cold to me," she said. "Not anymore." He looked at her. Does it hurt, the change?" "No," she said. "It feels like coming home." He stood in the incoming tide with his hand resting at her hip, the scales warm and silver blue under his fingers. And Marina looked at the sky above them. The first real light of spring arriving at the horizon, the gray giving way to a pale, tentative gold, and felt the call settle in her chest with the deep, satisfied completeness of a frequency that has found its resonance. From the cliff path above them, a voice carried down on the morning air with the cheerful, carrying projection of a man who had learned that trying to be subtle was not among his genuine capabilities. "Good morning," Cato called. I wanted to check, is that—" A pause. "Are those scales?" Marina looked up at the cliff. "Yes," she called. A long pause. "Magnificent," Cato said with deep feeling. "Ren, come look at this." From somewhere further back on the headland, Ren's voice, measured and certain. "I can see from here." "You can see from—" "Come look," Cato said. "I am looking," Ren said. Then after a moment, "They're extraordinary." That, from Ren, was approximately the equivalent of a standing ovation. Kaelin looked up at the cliff and back at Marina with the expression of a man who has accepted, at some foundational level, that his life will always contain this specific quality of chaos and has decided he would not have it otherwise. Marina laughed. It arrived the way things arrive when they have been building for a long time, fully, without warning, from somewhere deep. The sound of it surprised her. It had been a long time since she had laughed the way water laughs, without thinking about whether it was appropriate, without checking the room for reactions, without calculating the cost. Kaelin looked at her laughing in the incoming tide, with the scales silver blue around her in the first morning light of spring, and something in his face moved, slow and sure and permanent. The way the call was permanent, the way the deep places were permanent, the way things are when they are finally, irrevocably, exactly what they were always meant to be. 1 year later, the tide tables at Ravencliff were the most accurate in the known territories. Marina had rewritten them. It had taken 6 months of daily tide readings, 3 months of cross-referencing with the historical documentation, and approximately 40 conversations with the scouts and coastal monitors who had been recording the data incorrectly for years through no fault of their own, but simply because no one had ever explained what the numbers actually meant. She had explained what the numbers actually meant. She had a room in the keep now, not just the East Wing bedroom, but a working room off the map room, where the tide documentation lived, and where she spent her mornings in the good weather and her afternoons in the bad weather, building the most comprehensive record of Ravencliff's coastal patterns that had ever existed. Dava had stopped treating her as a guest approximately 2 months in, when Marina had quietly helped reorganize the kitchen supply system during a period when Dava was managing a household cold that had felled 2 of her staff. Dava had returned from her recovery to find the supply inventory reorganized, accurately labeled, and annotated with a cross-reference system. She had looked at it for a long time. Then she had looked at Marina. She said. Which Marina had learned by that point was Dava's highest available form of compliment. The people of Ravencliff had been introduced to Marina in stages, not through a formal announcement, not through anything as abrupt as a public declaration, but through the gradual, organic process of a person simply being present. She went to South Haven with Kaelin in the 3rd month, ostensibly to inspect the tide infrastructure, but in practice because old Marin had sent a message saying the fish drying operation was fully restored, and she thought the Alpha King might like to see it. Old Marin was a woman in her 70s, with hands that looked like the cliffstone, and eyes that had been taking the measure of things for a very long time. She shook Marina's hand when Kaelin introduced her, looked at her steadily for a moment, and said, "The tide's been right since January." "Yes," Marina said. "Wasn't right for 8 months before that." "No," Marina said. "It wasn't." Old Marin looked at her for one more moment. Then she said, Come see the operation. I'll show you what we're catching. She had, Marina understood, just been accepted by the person whose acceptance mattered most in South Haven. Everything else followed from there, in the slow, steady way of things that the sea approves. On a morning in late autumn, a year and 3 months after a cold tide had thrown Marina Kalin onto the shore of Ravencliff, she stood at the tide line in the early gray light and felt the call in her chest like a heartbeat. Her own heartbeat, the one that had always been there, the one that the sea had always known and the rest of the world had taken a long time to catch up with. The scales were visible at her wrist today. They did that sometimes in the early mornings, when she had been in the water and the form was still present at the edges, silver blue, catching whatever light was available and making something beautiful out of it. She had stopped hiding them. There had been a period when she had checked herself before entering the keep's common areas, checking for scales the way she used to check her expression in the tide court, monitoring, managing, presenting the acceptable version. She did not do that anymore. She heard footsteps on the cliff path, even and deliberate, certain on the loose stone. The specific rhythm of a man who had walked this path every morning for over a year and knew every treacherous place by heart. She did not turn around. She listened to him come down the last 10 steps, heard him stop at the tide line, felt the familiar warmth of his presence at her left shoulder, the specific gravity of him, the way the call recognized it and rang softly in response, the way it had done every morning for a year, and which she had stopped expecting to become less remarkable and had simply accepted was going to feel this way for the rest of her life. His hand found hers at her side. She turned to look at him. He looked back at her in the gray autumn light, at the scales at her wrists, at the tide around their feet, at the shore they had walked every morning for a year, at the face he had first seen on a cold night when the sea had finished with her and left her on the sand. "The eastern pools," he said. "Fully restored," she said. "Cato's report came in yesterday. I read it." A pause. "Old Marin sent word. Best autumn catch in 11 years. "I know," Marina said. "She wrote to me directly." The corner of his mouth moved. "She likes you better than she likes me." "She respects you," Marina said. "She likes me. They're different things." "You sound like Cato." "I've been spending time with Cato." "I've noticed," Kalin said. "My concern levels are moderate." Marina looked at the sea, at the long gray-green swells moving in the autumn morning, at the tide coming in on its restored certain schedule, at the horizon where the sky met the water in the specific flat way of a world that had decided to be honest about its weather. The call rang in her chest, low and steady and ongoing. The sound of something that had found its channel and was moving in it, clear and certain. The way water moves when it has been given the space it needs, and no more resistance than is honest. She was the last mermaid. She was also, she understood now, the first of something. The first to honor the call with full knowledge of what it was. The first to choose it rather than simply be assigned to it. The first to stand on the shore of a territory and be present in it not as a visitor, not as a resource, not as a complication to be managed, but as herself. The voice of the call of tides. The woman who had rewritten the tide tables. The person Deva had said to, which was everything. She was home. Not because she had stopped being merfolk, not because the sea had released her, not because anything had been lost or given up or traded away, because home, she had learned, was not a fixed coordinate. It was not a location the deep places assigned to you. It was the shore where someone came down the cliff path every morning in the gray light to stand beside you. It was this. Kalen's hand in hers. The tide coming in. The scales silver blue at her wrists in the autumn morning. Above them, from the headland. "Good morning," Cato called, with the carrying projection of a man who had absolutely been up there the entire time. "The tide is looking excellent. Dava is making breakfast. Ren wants it noted that he was here before me, and therefore technically... I don't want it noted, Ren said, from approximately 2 feet away from Kato. You said... I said I was here first. I did not say I wanted it noted. The distinction is... significant, Ren said. Marina looked at Kaylin. He looked at her. We should go up, he said. Yes, she said. She did not move immediately. Neither did he. They stood in the incoming tide for one more moment. Just that. Just the two of them and the sea and the call ringing steadily through the water between their joined feet. And let the morning be what it was. Then they turned and walked up the cliff path together, toward the warmth and the breakfast, and the voice of Kato still engaged in what appeared to be a philosophical debate with Ren about the nature of precedence. The tide came in behind them, as it always had, as it always would. The sea had always known her name, and now, standing on the shore where someone waited for her every morning, Marina Kaylin finally knew it too. The end. If this story stirred any tide inside you, tell me in the comments. Was it the rejection on the beach, the moment she turned back on the road, the first kiss at the water's edge, or the scene when the sea finally calmed over Ravencliff? Comment. Which scene hit you the hardest? And let me know if you want more romances with alpha kings, mermaids, and stubborn seas that know everything before we do. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. I'll meet you again in the next story. With much love, Maggie Reed.